God of Trash, Cultivation LitRPG, From Trash Tier to the Ultimate Trash. Book 4 complete. By author Noct. Chapter 256 to 270. Soma listened, one perfect brow cocked curiously. In Rhys's hand, the hunger trembled hungrily, its eyes, or whatever part of it saw, locked on the partially formed filth pillar. Rhys ignored it for the time being. The adults were talking. The child would have to wait. I like the way you think, but I've got this icky mark on me, Soma said, lowering his robes in a way that Rhys chose not to interpret as flirtatious. I can take care of that. Really? He pursed his lips in disbelief. Yeah, and stop looking at me like that. Like what? Rhys raised his brows. Soma blinked back at him, then giggled. Oh, fine, I'll be good. Soma was tickling something in the back of Rhys's mind. His otherworldly beauty, his overly flirtatious manner, he recognized these traits. They usually weren't directed at other men or, he suspected, at whoever was nearest and also in possession of a beating heart, but he did recognize the traits nonetheless. Do you have a harem? Rhys asked. Soma gasped. How rude. A harem. I would never. I'm a fine, upstanding, modern citizen. Oh, sorry. You just gave me those vibes. Do I have a harem? No. I have several consenting live-in partners who are all aware of one another, yes, but a harem. Honestly, a harem. Ridiculous. It's a polycule. We're modern. Rhys opened his mouth, feeling like Soma had deeply insulted several non-traditional romance enjoyers, as the term was originally defined, and not the way it was perverted in its later round as NTR, then shut it. I'll just let him have that one. In any case, I am contractually bound to battle you and bring you in, or else die. If the mark is removed, Virgil will know. Virgil knows everything about the marks. Soma looked at Rhys meaningfully. And he trusts them. Rhys widened his eyes, instantly understanding. If he could edit, instead of remove, Soma's mark so that the man was no longer obligated to fight him, without removing the mark, then Virgil would believe that Soma had not yet encountered him. That would blind Virgil to the actual truth, whether Rhys was there or not. Virgil didn't believe his men. He didn't trust his underlings. The only person he trusted was himself, and by extension, the marks he'd inflicted on everyone under him. But that meant that if Rhys was able to undermine those marks, Virgil would continue to trust whoever he'd marked, because he believed in his marks, and he believed that they could not be overcome. Interesting, Rhys said thoughtfully. It was a fascinating concept. If he could exploit that, he'd be able to essentially turn all Virgil's men against him. So, I can remove it, but edit it, that's a little beyond my capabilities, Rhys said. Soma sighed. That's unfortunate. Unless you'd be willing to let me experiment with it. Soma looked at Rhys. Do you think that's a good idea? Rhys shrugged. I dunno. Do you have some underlings you don't particularly like? Some ex-lovers you're well and truly sick of? When you put it like that. Soma went to walk away, then froze. I don't think I can leave here without fighting you. The compulsion is that strong. It was always good to learn more about how the mark functioned, so that he knew what he could do around Bast, and how much he could trust his friend. Soma shrugged and smiled mysteriously. Can't tell me, huh? Rhys nodded. What if we go get your underling while fighting? Soma blinked at him. Right. You don't have to fight to kill. We can just fight to fight. The sword in Rhys's hand shuddered particularly hard. Hungry. Shish. The adults are negotiating, Rhys whispered. Well, that's true, Soma said slowly. But a high-tier fight is splashy and attention-grabbing. If we fought, and I didn't kill you, then Virgil would know, and know that I failed. I'd be in poor standing either way, whether he suspected me or not, and your plan wouldn't work anymore. What if we don't fight splashily, but just spar enough to satisfy the mark? Another mysterious smile. That's a no-go, too. Unfortunate. He frowned for a moment, then snapped his fingers. We're talking now, right? I'm not compelled to fight you the second I see you, no. What if we keep talking, all the way over to your disposable manpower? At that, Soma finally raised his brows and thought for a moment. Slowly, he said, I think I can do that. Can you do it without flirting with me? A deep sigh. That's a big ask. That's fine, that's fine. You can flirt a little. Oh, that's not permission. I heard permission. You heard wrong. Soma laughed lightly. He pointed at the hunger. What about the little one? Hungry. The hunger bellowed. Rhys gave him an embarrassed glance. Oh, He's an experiment I was trying out. He wants to eat the impure pillar. Eat? Soma asked, startled. Yeah, you want to see? Rhys offered. Soma gestured for him to go ahead. Rhys stepped forward. The hunger bucked in his hand, excited to get to the pillar. He set the sword on the pillar and stepped away. Before he'd stepped away, before he'd done much more than putting it on the pillar, the hunger surged into the pillar, greedily sucking in the impurities. A few sprayed around it, which Rhys quietly absorbed as the sword rushed on ahead. In the space of a handful of seconds, the sword had buried deep into the pillar, then sucked it in, leaving no hint of its existence but a hole in the ground. Rhys held out his hand, and the hunger leapt back to it. It thrummed faintly with excitement from having had such an excellent meal. Oh my, what a curious creature, Soma said, peering closer at the hunger. He glanced at Rhys. May I? Rhys held the hunger out, then hesitated. He's basically made of impurities. He will impurify you. It's not an attack, it's just his very being. Soma blinked at him, slowly. For the space of a single heartbeat, Rhys caught a glimpse of a horrifying monster made of filth and everything hideous in the world, and then it was gone again, replaced with the extraordinarily beautiful Soma. Right. Yes. I don't know who I thought I was talking to, Rhys said, and handed the sword over. I appreciate your gentlemanly instincts, though. Much better than that ruffian Virgil. Soma took the hunger in both hands, holding it out flat, carefully, as if it was a priceless artifact. His hands darkened, but only for a split second. He narrowed his eyes, and veins stood out on his perfect skin. The impurities vanished, and Rhys got the strange sensation that the hunger had backed down, as if it were cringing away in fear, as if it had caught a glimpse of an older, stronger version of itself. It was almost like it was a small dog, barking loudly, who ran into a big dog off the leash and suddenly became very quiet. How curious. It's almost like a prototype of myself, Soma murmured to himself, turning it over in his hands. Sensing the opportunity to use another of his favorite stock lines, Rhys quickly jumped in. I wouldn't dare compare it to your esteemed radiance. Soma chuckled and waved his hand at Rhys in an, oh, you, sort of way. He looked Rhys up and down. And you can handle it without taking any damage. Yeah. Rhys didn't say any more. He didn't want to give too much away to the one man who could probably guess his path. Soma looked him up and down again and bit his lip, and Rhys realized, suddenly, that the man's mind was going in a very different direction. I mean, no. Rhys, dear, you know, there are shape-shifting techniques out there. Oh, I know. I mean, you and me, whatever you like, no. Whoever you like. What did I say about flirting? This isn't flirting. This is business. Rhys sighed. Business is closed. What a pity. You know, I have to be very careful usually. I'm a dangerous person to touch. He offered Rhys his hand. Rhys hesitated, a little worried it was a trap, then delicately touched Soma's palm. Immediately, he understood. Impurities slammed into him, blackening his flesh as bad, no, worse than the hunger. Rhys desperately sucked in, barely able to maintain a 0 point against the influx of impurities from Soma. And then Soma took a deep breath. Veins stood out on his forehead for a second, then vanished, and the impurities stopped flowing. Rhys retracted his hand. Wow, do you know how many years it took for me to reach that point? He shook his head. I can't imagine. Centuries. Soma looked at his own hand. Centuries before I was able to touch another living being without killing it. Before I was able to hold something beautiful without making it hideous. I spend every waking moment desperately withholding my strength in the hopes that I don't harm the things and people I care for. Rhys looked at him, and for the first time, he felt like he was seeing the real man behind the beautiful exterior and the flirty demeanor. There was sorrow in his eyes, mixed with a quiet, desperate longing, and he realized what it meant, at last, for Soma to have a taste for the finer things in life. Soma was an impure golem, a being made of filth and impurities, who exuded filth everywhere he went whether he wanted to or not. The finer things in life were contrary to his very being. It wasn't just that he wanted what Darren didn't want him to have, or that he had a mind of his own. Deeply, desperately, he wanted to be able to do what Rhys could do without thinking, to touch someone else, to admire a gem without shattering it, to eat a delicious meal without turning it to filth in his mouth. It wasn't an unreasonable or ridiculous thing to want, it was a simple, pure desire, one that Rhys could understand without having to think hard about it. At his core, Soma wanted a good life. A normal life. A life where he could enjoy the things that everyone else in the world could enjoy, without having to constantly remain aware of himself and restrain himself to avoid destroying them. To live an entire life like that, standing in the trash while gazing at all that was good and pure, and knowing that you could never have it, a painful, empty, hollow life. His heart ached for Soma, but then he realized, this wasn't a tragedy. It was a story of conquest. Soma had overcome that. It might be hard for him, but he had become able to enjoy the fine things in life. Even if it took constant effort, he had still overcome his weakness, and he could continue to fight and overcome it into the future. You can touch your lovers now, though, so don't act like I'm your only refuge, Rhys said, crossing his arms in mock crossness. Yes, but there's a difference between holding back and truly letting yourself go, you know. Soma said, fluttering his lashes. Rhys nodded blankly. Yes, I, Rhys, sex-heaver, understand this statement. Soma paused, and his eyes lit up. Rhys, don't tell me. I haven't told you anything. Oh dear. Oh my pure, sweet child. I didn't know. You are a treat. You don't know anything. Soma chuckled. It's okay, darling. We can take it slow. Gesturing, he indicated for Rhys to follow him. Let's get back to my hair, my men, before you tempt me too much. Rhys snapped his head around. It is a harem. You don't know anything. Soma chuckled, and Rhys felt like he had a different meaning than Rhys had had. I take back all the pity I felt toward you. That's okay. I don't want you feeling pity. There's lots of other things we can feel. Together. Stop waggling those eyebrows. I don't know what you're talking about. Soma led him down the mountain. Rhys followed him, hanging the hunger from his belt. After its latest meal of impurities, the hunger took a nap, just like a well-fed infant, and it was silent and dormant, not giving off impurities nor actively holding them back. That wasn't dangerous for Rhys, but anyone else who touched the hunger, bar Soma, would not have an easy time carrying it away, if they survived the initial encounter at all. There was a small but fine flying boat waiting for them at the base of the mountain. The two of them boarded the boat, and Soma flew it off toward the horizon. Not too far off, he angled the boat down and landed on the peak of a mountain, where one of the nicest houses Rhys had ever seen awaited them. It was more complex than house, with tall, delicate pagoda towers and steep angled roofs topped with gold dragons. All the roofs were red, for some reason, while the houses had thick, gorgeous beams lacquered to a shining black. Big red double doors had bright gold fittings, big round ring pulls, and a detailed inlaid dragon pattern. All the dragons were Eastern style, to match the style of the building. Come to think of it, I've seen no dragons, Eastern, Western, or otherwise, in this world. Not real or fictional, either. He eyed the inlay. Was this what dragons looked like in this world? Did this world even have dragons? Hell, aside from animal spirits, he'd only seen monsters at the northern border, and even then briefly. It occurred to him, as they landed at the front of the palace, because that was what it was, really, calling it a house was a joke, that he had just allowed Soma, a powerful remnant weapon, to take him back to his home/compound, where Soma had doubtlessly made infinite preparations to fight and also had all his flunkies and underlings there to join in. If Soma was just making a play to defeat Rhys as maximally as possible, then he'd certainly gotten Rhys in a good place to do just that. He had seemed to legitimately want the mark off him, though. No, I think that's it, actually. I'm right in both cases. Or rather, Soma has created a win-win for him. Soma either got the mark off of him, or edited, anyways, and if Rhys failed, then Soma had changed the battlefield to create the best possible surroundings for him. No wonder the guy had been so agreeable. It was only a positive for him. I'm in it now, Rhys thought, a little nervous. He honestly wasn't sure if Soma was a good matchup for him or not. They both had the same path, largely, but different expressions of the same thing. Soma had had more time to explore it, but he wasn't much interested in it, and preferred to enjoy the finer things in life and the finer people. Rhys was probably more focused than Soma, but he'd had relatively little time to pursue his path. He'd reached Tier 4, but he wasn't sure what tier Soma was. He felt about as powerful as Rhys, but, well, Rhys suppressed his tier almost instinctively by now. Soma definitely did the same, if he felt anything about the man, it was that he was definitely a tear suppressor. In other words, he couldn't trust his instincts when it came to Soma's power level. Well, let's just hope things go well. Soma hopped off the ship with a skip in his step, totally unaware of Rhys's internal struggles. Rhys followed at his heel. Soma skipped right up to the double doors and threw them wide, planting his fists on his hips and greeting the room with a full-throated, "Yo, kittens. Daddy's home." Rhys jolted, dumbstruck by the most tacky greeting he'd ever heard in his life. Oh no. Men and women in various states of undress came forward to greet him as Soma entered the room. Rhys hung back a bit, not wanting to get caught up in the rather handsy crowd. Soma greeted each of them individually, whether that was a sloppy kiss, a peck on the cheek, a hug, or even a pat on the head. "Who's that?" a doe-eyed woman in her linger asked, looking at Rhys. "A friend, just a friend," Soma said brightly, moving on. She gave Rhys an evaluating once-over, then snorted dismissively. "He'll forget about you within the week." "I really am just a friend," Rhys protested, though he could already feel that he'd lost that battle. "Do you bring anyone home that isn't destined for your bed, Soma?" "At last, the kittens, people." Rhys forcibly corrected himself, retreated, and Soma was free to proceed. He gestured Rhys onward, and Rhys followed. Well, look who the cat dragged in." Rhys froze mid-step. He turned. "Lyra, what have I told you? In this house, I'm daddy and your kitten," Soma insisted. Lyra lounged on the stairs, draped over the railing, her usual umbrella tucked into the nook of her arm. She looked down at Rhys and smiled mysteriously, something vicious in the smile. "Hello again." Rhys swallowed, ignoring Soma's interjection. "Hello. I'm glad to see you survived after abandoning us. I had to retreat, or else the Sword Saint would have killed me." She hummed, deep in her throat. "And no thought for us." No, I thought about you guys a lot. I thought that if I stuck around, they'd grab you guys too. That distancing myself from you would put you below their notice. You didn't think that we were, in of ourselves, valuable targets from the resistance against the Empress." Rhys swallowed. His mouth was dry, and the pit of his stomach felt hollow. "No, she's right. I did abandon them. That's on me." He looked down. "I'm sorry." Lyra harumphed. She ran a hand through her wet hair. "I'm fortunate to have been picked up by Soma. He's kept me nicely while I'm on house arrest." Soma gave her an apologetic look. "Boss's orders. I really don't care if you leave or not, it's this icky mark making me keep you here." "Oh, I know." Lyra looked at Rhys. "At least you showed back up, at last." What about Sable and Mouse?" Rhys asked. "They sent Sable to Ernesto, but she was stronger than him. I'm not sure what happened after that. I think she got marked, though. And you?" She lifted her hand, limply hooking her loose neckline and drawing it back to reveal the mark. Soma grimaced. "It's inescapable, these days. Honestly, it's not even because she's a prisoner. Almost everyone Virgil encounters gets marked." "That's disgusting," Rhys murmured to himself. "Oh, I agree," Soma purred, something dangerous and sensual in his voice, which Rhys did not understand at all. "And Mouse?" He prompted Lyra a second time. Lyra's brows furrowed. "All the assistants got away fine. No one was rounding up animals." "Not the animals, the woman. Mouse. Remember. Glasses, loves books." She squinted at him and shook her head. "No. Was she working on the soda? A chip maker?" Rhys swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. Mouse had deleted herself from Lyra's memories. This was worse than he'd thought. "Who?" Soma asked, suddenly curious. "Don't worry about it. I was mistaken," Rhys said. He nodded at Soma. "You were going to show me someone." Soma looked at him. Haven't I?" Rhys stiffened. He stared at Soma in disbelief, then hardened his gaze in anger. "No. Find someone else. You'll be motivated, won't you?" "I refuse." Lyra looked from one to the other. "What's this about?" Soma and Rhys stared one another down. Rhys released a tiny bit of his aura, pointed at Soma, and Soma did the same. Their auras clashed. The tension between them went taut, sparks all but flying. Rhys reached to the hunger, preparing to wake the sword. "It might be time for your first real combat." And then Soma let out a little noise and rolled his eyes back, dropping a little where he stood. He regained his composure and smiled. "Oh, my. That was something. Just a joke, Rhys dear. Come on, I'll show you the real one. Rhys narrowed his eyes. I didn't appreciate the joke. That's okay. It was good for me. Come on, this way. I've been keeping this one special, just trying to think up something to do with him. You've really solved my problem quite neatly. Glad I could help, Rhys deadpanned, still a bit sore after the unfunny joke. Lyra crossed her arms. I don't appreciate being the butt of the joke, Soma. Kitten didn't like that. I'm sorry, Kitten. Daddy won't do it again, Soma said, making baby doll eyes at her. She rolled her eyes back at him. I can't wait for you to be over this phase. He's not always like this. Rhys asked. Depends what you mean. Horny as hell. Yes, always. But the daddy kitten thing in particular just started a month or so ago. I like to keep things fresh around the house, Soma explained, as if it was perfectly normal. Did I just miss his leather gimp phase? Rhys joked. Lyra gave him a long-suffering look. Did I actually? Rhys wondered. Would Kitten like that? Daddy has lots of outfits, Soma said. Kitten would not like that, Rhys blurted flatly, before his brain had time to catch up with his mouth. Don't play along. You're only feeding him. He loves it. It doesn't matter how deadpan you do it, he's still going to enjoy it. But it was too late, the words had escaped his mouth. Soma brightened up, beaming. Then Daddy won't do that. Just for Kitten. Lyra sighed loudly. She turned and ascended the stairs, vanishing back to the second floor. When you figure out how to break me free, you know where to find me. How did you? She paused. Looking over her shoulder, she snorted at him. I know you. With that, she turned back around and climbed on. Rhys shook his head at her back and sighed. She's a good friend, you know, Soma informed him, as he led him on through the house. Rhys followed, not wanting to be left behind. Even when Virgil threatened her with the worst, she refused to give up anything. Rhys stiffened. He tortured her. No. In the end, someone else told him everything he needed to know, and he only kept your companions around, marked, as hostages. That sinking sensation began again in the pit of Rhys's stomach. It was Mouse, wasn't it? Mouse had told him everything. But why? To save the other girls. He would understand that. He would. And of course Mouse would do that. She was a good person. She cared about others. But if that's why she caved, why delete herself from Lyra's memories? Was she embarrassed? Was it something else? Soma opened a door in his palace that was just as ornate as all the others to reveal an unfinished tunnel descending into raw earth. Shall we? Rhys gave the tunnel an uncertain look. Extremely horny man invites you to his unfinished basement, do you go? Knowing he was making mistakes, he took a deep breath. I suppose we shall. The staircase descended. On, deeper and deeper into the earth, until the chill of the underground wrapped around Rhys's ankles. Soma bounced down the steps, humming a happy little tune to himself that was totally incongruent with the dank space they descended into. Light emanated from him in a scintillating aura, serving as the only light in the space. The stairs came to an end, and Soma stepped into a larger space, too large for his aura to light. Rhys hung back, scanning the area with his mana. Before he finished, Soma snapped his fingers, and a stone set in the ceiling glowed. It beamed down a narrow beam of light onto a man sitting on a chair, his ears and eyes covered, his hands bound behind the chair. The second they approached, the man sat upright. Soma, I know that's you. Free me, before Virgil punishes you. Soma snapped his fingers, and the coverings on the man's ears fell away. Oh no, I would hate it if Big Papa Virgil punished me. Oh no. A blush spread over the bound man's cheeks, all the way to his ears. Nonetheless, he bared his teeth and continued fiercely, you won't like it. Your reckoning is coming. Any day now, he'll come for me. Soma chuckled. He leaned over the man, letting his hair just touch the tip of the man's nose. It's been weeks, Amos. Accept it, darling. Virgil isn't coming for you, or anyone else, for that matter. You've been abandoned. He's lost faith in you. How sad, how sad. He put a delicate finger at the edge of the man's robes and chased the line of the collar down toward the belt. There isn't anyone coming to save you, because nobody cares. Amos trembled, but put on a brace face anyways. Virgil cares. You'd better release me now, or else when he hears about everything you're doing in this place, he'll abandon you. Oh darling, you are too cute. Soma stepped back. He's one of Virgil's spies. If he gets free, he will report me for not imprisoning Lyra properly, and a dozen other small transgressions. That plan you suggested will go up in smoke. So, in other words, he's disposable. Rhys asked. In fact, if you succeed, I'll have to execute him manually. Practice to your heart's desire. If you fail, I have spares. Soma crossed to Rhys and rested a hand on his shoulder, gazing directly into his eyes. But not too many spares. Don't treat his life too lightly. We wouldn't want to make my cute little joke a reality, Rhys narrowed his eyes. We wouldn't want that. He stressed the we, because Soma wouldn't enjoy that route either. Oh, I don't know about that. You'd be surprised at how much a man can enjoy. Soma trailed his hand off Rhys's shoulder and walked away, vanishing into the darkness. I'm rooting for you. Rhys watched him go, then sighed. He turned to the man in the chair. You heard him, Amos. I don't think things are looking good for you. You don't think? Amos snarked back. Nah. Rhys pulled a chunk of wood out of his trash pile and materialized a chair beside Amos, then sat in it. Amos glanced around, then leaned toward Rhys. Listen, I don't know who you are, I don't know what Soma told you, but Virgil rewards those who help him. If you get me out of here, I'll put in a good word with him. I'm one of his most trusted confidants. I can get you anything you like. Money, a noble title, power, what do you want? Name it. If you get me out of here, it's all yours. Rhys pulled the man's robes back to reveal the mark. Amos flinched, startled. Well, I've already got money, and I have plenty of power. I'm not really sure what nobility gets you, but I'm already strong enough to found my own school. There really isn't much your Virgil has that I want. Surely you need something. A cultivation resource. Something to further your magehood, or break you past a bottleneck. A rare material for a potion, or maybe a ritual. Anything. Name it. No, there really isn't anything. Rhys prodded at the mark, getting a feel for it. This one felt a bit more complicated than the ones he'd seen on the mooks, which made sense if this guy was someone Virgil trusted. Of course he'd want to be more particular with the mark. Trust me. Whatever Soma's offered you, I can double it, the man said desperately. You can topple Virgil twice. What? Rhys sighed. He gripped Amos's jaw, turning his head to get a better angle on the mark. I'm Rhys, you idiot. Rhys foundling. I'm, like, public enemy number 1 right now, or something. Amos gaped. His jaw worked, fighting against Rhys's hand, and then he went limp. After a moment, he spoke again. I always meant to ask, if I met you. Yeah, why? Why what? Why did you turn against the Alliance? Weren't you born here? Weren't you raised at an Alliance school? Rhys scoffed. I didn't turn against the Alliance turned against me. What? Your precious Virgil is a big fucking idiot with trust issues. I just wanted to topple the Empire, and I succeeded, but Virgil couldn't have that. Guess he was afraid I might topple the Alliance next. I wasn't going to, but then he attacked me, so now I kind of have no choice. But seriously, if he'd just left me alone, I'd have just wandered off into the woods on my own, and none of this would be happening. That's not possible. It's very possible. Not only that, but it's also happening. It's all Virgil's fault. If he'd just let well enough alone, he could have kept his pretty little kingdom, but no. Amos shook his head. Lies. I don't believe it. What's the point in lying to a dead man? At that, Amos went deadly silent. A kind of panic dread set in around him, and he gulped. Well, it's not entirely true, Rhys allowed after a moment. He fucked with my friend. The second he did that, he was dead. But that's still Virgil's fault, so your boss is still a big dumb idiot who causes problems for himself. This time, he didn't let Amos reply. He pushed mana into the mark and immersed himself into it, putting his all into studying the little diamond. Instead of simply playing around with the different lines of mana, this time, he observed, watching how the mana flowed through the mark and feeling the spell from outside. He ought to be able to sense the intent, lowercase intent, of the person who built the spell from the spell itself, since spells were basically ones will imposed upon the world, imbued into mana, but he simply wasn't that good at reading spells. Now that he had time and a few disposable people to play around with, he might as well sharpen up his spell-reading skills. He sunk into his contemplation of the mark. Amos spoke and moved, trying to break his concentration or otherwise distract him, but Rhys was used to trashy learning environments. He swayed with Amos's movements, easily able to match the man's limited range of motion, chairbound as he was, and blocked out Amos's comments, totally ignoring them. At one point, he was vaguely aware of Soma stopping by and recovering Amos's mouth and ears, but it barely registered beyond acknowledgement of it occurring. His whole life became the spell, and the spell became his whole life. He focused everything on it, and his world diminished to the lines of mana, the heartbeat of the parasitic link to Amos's personal mana, and the ever-so-faint intent clinging to the exterior of the lines, which informed their purpose. He felt, distantly, as he explored the spell, that he was not going about this the right way. The lines themselves had meaning to them, or else the spell would not be built of such tiny, delicate lines. If he learned enchanting, or whatever technique formed the basis of the marks, he would be able to read the lines outright, rather than study their intent from outside. But he rejected that. Learning one language for enchanting was worthless, when it was likely limited to this region, or maybe even the school Virgil had learned at. Magic was deeply bespoke, even he had shared in the common experience of inventing his own way to accomplish things, maybe even more than most mages had. To invest time and effort into learning one language was good if he wanted to build something. But if he wanted to understand enchanting, any enchanting, not just this enchanting, then it was better to find another way. A general way, that would work beyond this moment, this series of marks, this region. Because I'm not staying in this region much longer. He could already feel it, the walls closing in. He was rapidly becoming a big fish in a small pond, and that was soon going to slow his advancement. The only way to get stronger was to grind against unsurmountable odds, and he couldn't find that in a region where he was one of a handful of Tier 4s, or even worse, standing at the pinnacle as a Tier 5. There were tiers beyond 5, and he wasn't going to stop at the pinnacle of this region. He wanted to stand at the pinnacle of the world, like he'd told Bast, as a true god of trash. He threw himself back into the mark, banishing the distracting thoughts. The intent that clung to the marks was something unintentional, he felt. Artifacts left behind in the process, that, though they shaped the magic, were not meant to be included in its workings. Ghosts of the creators will that were never meant to be seen, let alone included in the mark wherever the wearer dragged it. They were faint here, the mark repeated so many times that the creator barely had to consider their intent when they impressed it onto Amos, but nonetheless, they persisted. Perhaps they remained out of habit. Perhaps they were an artifact of, the way he always did it. Or perhaps they were necessary, if subconscious inclusions. Regardless, Rhys targeted them, focusing on them intently, yet gently, so they didn't vanish, and watching to see their true purpose. It was truly like trying to see a ghost clearly, or looking for mist, or trying to get a close look at fog. When he looked directly at them, they grew fainter. The closer he tried to study them, the harder they were to see. From a distance, he could easily see their general shape, but any closer, and they began to fade under the force of his scrutiny. He had to be patient, hang back, and get a look at the fuzzy, general shape of them. Only then could he start to piece together their purpose and meaning. Slowly, the meaning of the line he was gazing at coalesced into his head. He let the meaning flow into his mind. Words floated in the void, slowly clarifying into a message, feed mana left. Rhys stared at it, deadpan. Useless. This was no good. It was way too slow, and not all the lines were useful to him, nor did they have meanings attached to them that was useful to understand. It made sense. He was sure, feed mana left, was an important thing Virgil had to do when he built this mark, but it wasn't useful for Rhys to know now. If it took him this long to decode each line, only for most of the lines to be totally meaningless, he'd have to spend weeks on each mark. He needed to understand the mark now, not 5 weeks from now. Wait, I've been going about this all wrong. Rhys looked at the mark again with fresh eyes. The mark was valuable, yes, and intentional. It hadn't been thrown away, but been intentionally placed. But the intent was not. It was accidentally left by Virgil when he built the mark. That made it trash. Not trash intent, but trashed intent. If he engaged his intent and reached out to the mark, he could probably sweep all the trashed intents in one fell swoop. Let's find out. Rhys activated his intent, reaching out to the lingering intent still attached to the mana threads that made up Amos's mark. The threads trembled, and the intent wavered, then lit up bright, resonating with Rhys. An overwhelming quantity of information poured into Rhys's head as all the trashed intents surged toward him at the same time. Rhys's head ached, and blood flowed from his nose, but he slammed his head into it anyways, welcoming all the information into his skull at once. He could try to slow it, or refuse it, but that wasn't his way. He was trash. If he refused good training opportunities like this, he'd never advance. It was only due to his willingness to trash himself and throw himself into every good opportunity he got, that he was able to reach Tier 4 so early. His head ached, and his skull pounded, but the information flowed steadily into his head. Each thread of mana lit up in his mind, drawing him in. He fell into the swirling vortex of information willingly, letting it wash him away. Foreign knowledge flowed into his head, and then he was gone. He stood over Amos. The man kneeled before him, willingly pulling aside his collar to bare the spot where the mark would go to him, to Virgil. He lifted a purple-robed arm and pressed his fingers to the man's flesh, just below his collarbone, and just inside where the hem of his robes would lie. Mana poured from his fingers, and he shaped it with expert ease, drawing the foundation of the mark, then filling it in. His intent, his desires for Amos, all of these flowed into the mark, and Amos accepted them willingly. In this moment, his mana connected to Amos's, and as a result, he could sense everything about the man. His heartbeat, his breathing, even his thoughts, though vaguely, rather than literally reading the man's mind, he could sense the general gist of his feelings. Amos's devotion toward him was genuine, and deeply held, not superficial, like many of those he marked. For a moment, he was tempted to leave off the more forceful elements of the mark, but then he hardened his heart and finished it, adding all the usual coercive pieces to the enchantment. Just because Amos was willing and earnest in this moment, didn't mean he would always remain that way. People's hearts and minds were fickle things. Tomorrow, this man could meet a beautiful woman and decide she was worth betraying him over. He couldn't accept that. No, the only way to trust Amos was to use the mark to ensure he wasn't able to betray him. He pushed his mana into the mark, finishing the binding. Threads of mana expanded to cover all of Amos, then condensed into the diamond-shaped mark. Amos grimaced. The marking process was painful, then gazed up at him with clear, earnest eyes. "Thank you, my liege." He smiled. "If only everyone could be so grateful. It is my honor." And then the vision ended, and Rhys stood in the basement with Amos once more. But this time, he knew the mark as though he'd made it himself. He reached out into it and severed the parts of the mark that forced Amos to act according to Virgil's will, using some impurities to easily block off the mana threads. The mark flickered, then remained. Now that he'd experienced how Virgil made the marks and tracked them, he knew that if Virgil touched the mark, he would know it had been altered, and even know exactly how Rhys had altered it. But this mark, and most of his marks, did not have any kind of tampering alert system, so without touching it, Virgil would have no idea that anything had gone wrong with his mark. Rhys sat back, satisfied. "I've done it." "Done what? What did you do?" Amos asked, horror creeping into his voice. At some point, he'd wiggled out of his mouth restraint again, and was once more able to speak. He craned his neck to look at the mark, then looked at Rhys. "You can't. You don't understand. He'll never trust me again." "Oh, I understand," Rhys said, then sighed. "This is unfortunate." "What is unfortunate?" Amos asked, still panicking. "You're loyal to Virgil." How is that unfortunate?" "Because I succeeded. I can't have you running back to Virgil with proof that I can edit his marks. I need him to think his marks still function for this to work." Amos paled, but at the same time, a bold expression flashed over his face. "I won't tell him. You can trust me. Please. I'm bound down here with no way out. You can trust me." "No, I really can't." Rhys sighed again. "I guess I have to kill you." He reached out for Amos's face. Amos shied away. "No, no, no, no." Rhys lowered his hand. "Oh, wait, Soma." There was a pause, and then the steady thump-thump of feet on stairs, and Soma appeared. He was a little disheveled, in a charming kind of way, with the kind of scuffed hair and imperfectly worn robes that suggested exactly the kind of activities he'd probably been up to. "Yes, darling, I did it." Rhys sat back, gesturing at Amos. "I can edit marks now." Soma blinked, startled, then ran over and gave Rhys a big hug. "Rhys, I knew I could count on you." He drew back a little, just far enough to look Rhys in the eye. "Will you edit your own friend's mark?" Yeah, he could do it, so he'd do it on anyone. Soma sighed. Yun understand, right? I can't just trust anyone. Even Rhys Foundling. If you decided to trigger my mark under the guise of editing it, even I would be in big trouble. Well, at the end of the day, darling, I have to trust you anyways. But I want proof you can truly do it with enough confidence to do it to your friend, first, no. No, I understand, Rhys said. It was a trashy attitude to take, forcing him to prove that he could do it by doing it to someone he loved and trusted, but he understood it. He probably would have done the same, if a mysterious man had appeared and claimed he could do something to Rhys's body that might kill him if it went wrong. Forcing the man to prove it on someone he cared for first, would at least prove that he was capable of doing it. Sure, it was one of those default villainous things to do, but sometimes the heroes were naive idiots who'd trust anyone with their lives even when they had no reason to trust that person, and the villains were often vastly more competent than the heroes, besides. If the heroes didn't have plot armor, they would never make it through all their foolish blind trust exercises, whereas the villains, without plot armor, were the ones making rational and reasonable choices. And maybe he was in his villain arc. Who was to say? Ah, you're so understanding. Soma rubbed his face against Rhys's cheek. Let's go upstairs and I'll give you a proper reward, Soma, Rhys said, pulling away. What? Eyes on the prize, friend. We can be more than friends. Rhys gave him a look. Soma grinned and winked. I'm just teasing. Come on, let's go test this technique, Wait, we can't let him live. He's deeply loyal to Virgil. Rhys nodded at Amos. Oh, that is unfortunate. Soma sauntered over, then paused. Or would you? I have plenty of blood on my hands already. I don't have any need to add extraneous blood. Soma put his hands up defensively. Some men enjoy the act. It's actually quite common, you know. Especially among men, but among women too, the act of killing can be a ruse. Yeah. Sexual impotence, right. I've watched enough crime dramas. Soma blinked at him, then looked down. Rhys, darling, don't tell me. I can whip up a solution for that. You don't have to be so shy. Rhys blushed. Not me. It was a joke, never mind. You clean up down here. I'll be waiting upstairs with Lyra. Chuckling to himself, Soma approached Amos. Amos shook his head, cringing in the chair. Rhys took to the stairs, then paused, looking back. It wasn't that he wanted to watch a man get murdered, even if it was out of necessity, but he needed to gather information about Soma. The man was on his side now, but who knew? Soma had a history of betrayal. He'd be all the more stupid to not expect a betrayal from the man. It was like cheaters. Once someone cheated once, they'd be sure to cheat again, and only fools thought that someone with a cheater's mindset would ever remain loyal to a one-on-one relationship. And given how Soma viewed the world, what was to say that he didn't essentially see all his relationships as romantic, and therefore, betrayal was analogous to cheating. Ultimately, the motivator in Soma's betrayals and general romantic cheating was the same, a selfish desire to please oneself. As long as Rhys remained aligned with Soma's personal goals, he need not fear betrayal. But the second he struck out and left them behind, Soma would start plotting. Rhys shrugged to himself. That's fine. I'm not planning to make Soma a long-term ally. We're allies of convenience for taking down Virgil, that's all. Soma settled on Amos's lap. Amos leaned away, his face utterly pale, the veins standing out on his forehead as he strained with all his might. A beautiful smile crossed over Soma's face, and he leaned down and kissed Amos on the forehead. Black impurities burst from that spot, and in the space of seconds, the man's entire body crumbled away, impurities tearing apart his clothes, his bindings, even the chair he sat on. Rhys raised his brows. Holy shit. That was a stronger impure attack himself than he, the hunger, or both of them combined could muster. He eyed Soma, a little nervous for the first time. I might be outclassed here. Soma tipped his head back, his smile deepening, eyes rolled back as he was lost in the moment, so Rhys quickly turned before he was caught peeping and hurried up the stairs. He was the one intruding on this private moment, and if Soma noticed, he'd be the one at fault. At the top of the stairs, a pair of beautiful women in nothing but transparent bathrobes awaited him. They pounced, then realized they'd grabbed the wrong man and released him, giggling. Where's Soma? One asked, tossing her hair. He's still down there. He'll be up soon. He might be good now, Rhys informed them. The two exchanged a look, then giggled in sync. Oh no. No, darling. He's never good. That's great. You know what? That's awesome for you guys. Excuse me. Rhys sidled past, trying not to look at anything, and hurried to the upstairs. This place was even more dangerous than the brothel he'd been to, honestly. There, everyone had been busy with one another. Here, everyone was waiting on Soma, desperate for his attention, and putting on displays to draw his eyes, and that meant provocation everywhere. Soma probably loved it, but it was overwhelming for Rhys. I need to get out of here. For more than one reason. Soma wasn't a good person. He was a fascinating person, and he was trashy in ways Rhys would never be, which Rhys appreciated just for seeing someone else explore avenues that weren't available to him, but he wasn't good. He was objectively a bad person, who collected a harem and violated all kinds of moral and social principles, but then, he was a remnant weapon. Just like how Sid was openly horrifying and Straw had his moments of extreme violence, and somewhat strict and extreme plans for training two boys, Soma, too, was problematic. But then, he didn't need to be a good person. Rhys wasn't a good person, either. He was trash, and since he was trash, he wasn't like those heroic protagonists from his favorite works, who had moral codes and refused to work with people who didn't align from them. He needed to grasp at whatever straws he could, and whatever trash was willing to be his ally, he would be grateful to have on his side. Of course, Soma was truly a trashy ally. He had a betrayal problem, and if anyone from his world looked back on this time, he was pretty sure they'd ask why he aligned himself with such a sexed-out dude, who was so desperately available for cancellation. But from all that he'd seen, Soma's relationships were all consensual. In fact, though he liked flirting and teasing with Rhys and, he was sure, everyone around him, he always backed away when Rhys told him to. There didn't seem to be anything untoward going on, so he didn't see a reason for him to personally reject Soma. He stopped and looked around him, at all these people desperate for Soma, and yet none of them truly interested in the man. These halls were empty. They were full of human connection, and yet they lacked the true connection that Soma actually craved. The sex, the constant betrayal of people around him, the distance, constantly having to hold back even when he was surrounded by others. He clearly saw Soma as he was, for the first time, a lonely child, looking for acceptance, rejected by the world around him to the point that even the objects he desired fell apart in his hands. He needs someone. Not me, but someone. Someone who actually loved him and saw him as he was, instead of this meaningless swirling pool of physical, shallow connection. Rhys, darling, did I keep you? Oh dear. Girls, you didn't have to. Oh my. That's enthusiastic. Oh. Rhys sighed and rolled his eyes. Without looking back, he waved. I'll be upstairs with Lyra. Rhys headed upstairs. He scanned the second floor, ignoring everything but Lyra's signature, then crossed quickly to the room that held her. He knocked first, to be polite, and also because he had no idea what to expect from Soma's house. Lyra was alone, but there was plenty that someone could get up to on their own time, that they shouldn't be barged in on rudely during. The door immediately opened. Lyra stood in the gap, giving him a deadpan look. Well, look at how long it took you to come visit little old me. You enjoying the sights? I was busy doing important research, Rhys countered honestly. Is that what the kids are calling it nowadays? She asked. Rhys crossed his arms. All right. Show me your mark. I'm gonna edit it. Lyra looked him in the eye. My mark. The one that blows up if someone messes with it. You're going to edit it. I sure am. I've already done it once. And, did the guy survive? He sure did. Can I see him? Rhys licked his lips. Well, no. He didn't survive Soma. But Soma happened to him after I successfully edited his mark. Lyra raised her brows. He shrugged. Listen, if you really don't believe me, I can straight up remove the mark instead. I've done that a billion times. Soma wants me to demonstrate mark editing on you, though, so he trusts me to do it to him. Kind of a dick move. He'd probably be honored to hear you say that. Lyra snorted, amused despite herself. So, what do you say? I can even edit it, then remove it afterward. All up to you, Rhys offered, spreading his hands. She considered, then put her hands on her hips. What are you going to edit on the mark? I was going to remove any compulsion toward Virgil. Basically, neuter the mark so that you still have it, and it looks like it functions from a distance, but it doesn't actually compel you to do anything. It goes from being a nasty compulsory thing to just another beauty mark. She put a hand on her chin. That's actually, it would help you. It would. You can remove it if it goes wrong. I can. Lyra nodded. Then let's get started. Rhys looked over his shoulder. Soma, you coming or what? Somewhere down the stairs, a woman giggled. Lyra gave Rhys a look, and Rhys sighed deeply. Gods. It's like being in high school all over again. On my way. Soma appeared at the door a moment later and hurried over to the chair set against the wall. Rhys glanced at it, then at the bed Lyra was evidently using. It was soaked, then back at the chair, and chose not to say anything. He gestured for Lyra to sit on the bed and crossed to her. You know, this isn't usually the activity we get up to when this chair is in use, Soma stated, drumming his fingers on the arms of the chair. I know, Rhys said, before anyone else could say anything. Soma and Lyra made eye contact, and the two of them shared a smile. We're all alone in this room. We could always. Rhys put his fingers to Lyra's mark and immersed himself in it rather than hear how that sentence ended. As he entered a trance, Soma let his sentence trail off. He leaned to the side, looking at Lyra. Is he always this easy to tease? I usually hold myself back, for everyone's sake. She paused for a few seconds. But yes. Oh my. I don't know how you do it. I could follow him around all day and entertain myself. I wouldn't even need him to touch me. No, at that point, that's the point, no. Neglect play. Lyra sighed. It isn't neglect play. He's just stupid. Soma beamed. But that's the best kind, isn't it? She shook her head. You're nothing but impure thoughts. Do you have any pure thoughts? Not at all. You know I'm a bundle of impurities. I might die if I had a pure thought. If it was that easy, surely an ex-lover would have killed you long ago. Oh, surely. Rhys, meanwhile, immersed himself in studying Lyra's mark. He didn't simply assume that the mark was identical to the last one he'd seen. Instead, he used the same trashed intense reading technique he did the first time to determine what Virgil had been thinking when he'd put the mark on Lyra. The intent was largely in the same form as the first time around, though he'd paid a little more attention to the mark, and added in a tracking section. Rhys hesitated, then left that be. He didn't know how to change the tracking part to track her somewhere else, or anything complicated like that. All he could do was turn parts of the mark on and off. Once again, even though Lyra was an enemy of Virgil, there wasn't any tamper detection on the mark. Maybe there isn't such a thing. Maybe Virgil thinks no one can change his marks aside from him. Has he even said that they can't be tampered with, or is that even a thing that usually happens in this world? It could be that no one thought about other people tampering with their enchantments, because that just wasn't a thing that anyone did. He turned off the parts of the mark that forced Lyra to compulsively tell the truth to Virgil and the parts that forced her to obey his orders, then retreated. Lyra and Soma fell silent as he snapped back to reality, and he looked from one to the other suspiciously. What? Nothing. Did you succeed? Soma asked, hands perched on his knee. Yeah, you can check if you want. She's still alive, and she won't be forced to tell Virgil things or obey his orders anymore. He can still track her. I can turn that off, but I'm pretty sure he'd know if I did, so we only want to do that once we're ready to go nuclear, all in. Soma looked at Lyra. Lyra paused, thinking, then said, Virgil wanted to punish Sable and I, but he was afraid of what you might do if he did, and that's why we're still in fine shape. Oh, really? Rhys said, a little confused. Why would Virgil be that scared of him? Wait, if that's the case, why'd he attack me in the first place? Soma stood, lifting a hand. Let me explain, as a remnant weapon who has been in this exact scenario many times. Virgil fears you. Ideally, you would be dead, and therefore not a problem. However, you survived what he thought was an instant kill, no danger attack. This makes you even more of a threat than he initially thought you were, which makes him even more afraid of you than he was originally. Now that you're more of a threat than you were when he tried to kill you, and out of his sight, and more capable than he initially judged you to be, you have become the ultimate threat. He's afraid of drawing any further ire, and he hopes that by holding your friends hostage, 1, he can compel you not to attack, and 2, by holding them in good shape and fine lodgings, that he can sway your heart a little to his side, so that you might not immediately kill him the next time you two meet, so that he can compel some discussion, perhaps, or even try a new trap. You have become the boogeyman, now, Rhys, the role I often play. You're more frightening now that he knows he can't kill you, not even with the Sword Saint. Rhys frowned, then nodded, slowly. He snapped his fingers. Yeah, I got it. It's like when you're on the toilet, and a spider comes down next to you, and you whiff the kill, but the spider falls to the floor and dashes off into the shadows. Now you don't know where it is and it's angry at you, so it's even scarier than when you could see it and you had the chance to, but failed to, kill it. Lyra gave Rhys a, "That's the stupidest metaphor I've ever heard, look." Soma nodded. Precisely. But he can kill me with the Sword Saint, Rhys pointed out after a beat. I mean, I ran away, but if that blow had hit me, I would have died. It injured a void beast. I can't even dream about fighting them yet. That's not the point. The point is that from Virgil's perspective, he pointed his biggest weapon at you, and you flaunted away unharmed. The Sword Saint is skilled enough that he would instantly know that he hadn't killed you, especially if, as you're implying, his blade didn't impact your flesh at all. Virgil knows you survived, and that terrifies him. Terrifies him worse than if you'd stood there and taken the Sword Saint's hit right in front of him, because he doesn't know how you survived. Like I said, Rhys Foundling, you have become the boogeyman. And that's one of the scariest things you can be. Hell yeah, Rhys muttered under his breath. That was cool as hell. Who didn't want to be the boogeyman to the big bad? And then the full implications of that hit him, and he sighed. That means he's going to be super paranoid, doesn't it? That he's going to try to line up every defense he has against me, and hit me as hard as he can with all he's got. Ah, kitten, don't get scared. Here, come give me all you've got, will that make kitten feel better? Rhys shot Soma a look. Is that your limit? Can you only hold out that long? I tried, but I'm only so good, Soma said, shaking his head. Besides, isn't that backward? Wouldn't daddy come at kitten? Rhys fell off, unable to finish the sentence with the absolutely hungry look Soma was giving him. Soma beamed. If that's what kitten likes. Rhys crossed his arms, very quickly interrupting the inadvertent roleplay. But if that's the case, then this plan I've got is even better, because he'll never see it coming. He's expecting a boogeyman, so let's give him the exact opposite. Soma grinned. Precisely. So, are you willing to let me edit your mark now? Or do you want me to do a few more examples first? Rhys asked. Soma pursed his lips. Although I would like more proof, you did do it to your friend, and you have confided in me, which suggests that you truly consider me part of your plan. Yeah, I do. And beyond that, I think we shouldn't spread our mark manipulation too far. If someone alerted Virgil to it, our entire plan would fall apart. I couldn't agree more. So I suppose I'll have to submit myself to you, Soma sighed at last. Could you use another word? Rhys asked, wincing a little. Open myself to your defilement. Surrender to your devious touch. Give in to your. Never mind. Submit is a great word. I love that word. Soma sat back down. He crossed his legs and sat up primly, baring his neck to Rhys. Come, dear Lord. Rhys resisted the urge to comment and put his fingers to Soma's mark. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Rhys touched Soma's mark and focused, putting his all into it. Immediately, he was struck by the quantity of trashed intents that rushed at him. It slammed into his head with a pounding strike, and his nose instantly began to bleed as his mental energy ran rampant, struggling to contain the onrushing surge of information. Virgil had put his all into Soma's mark, and he'd thought a lot about making it, so the mark contained a massive amount of trashed intent. Compared to any of the other marks he'd examined, it was absolutely chock full of intention and deliberation which Virgil had then left behind on accident, which meant Rhys was getting hammered with waves of useless information. His vision blurred, and his limbs weakened. His hand pulled away instinctively from the mark that was overloading him with information. No. Rhys slammed his hand back, forcibly keeping it on the mark. He wasn't going to give up this easily. He'd do it. He'd take all this information and comprehend it all, if it was the last thing he did. Ooh, how forceful, Soma purred. Mercifully, a vision welled up, and Rhys gave himself up to the vision so he wouldn't have to hear any more innuendos. Soma stood before him, his arms crossed, with a totally new expression on his face that Rhys had never seen before, irritation and earnest frustration. If it doesn't work, stop trying. Even I understand this principle. No one likes a man who doesn't know when to give up. I came here to escape the innuendos, but apparently Soma just talks like this all the time. Rhys despaired. This time, unlike last time, he was still himself in the vision, even though he saw it from Virgil's perspective. He immediately understood why. It was the immense overload of information, which was fiercely painful, far more than last time. With it active, he couldn't immerse himself fully in the vision and remained low-level self-aware. On top of that, the information itself still pounded through his head, keeping a layer of information between him and the vision. If I don't mark you, I can't trust you, Rhys Virgil said. It was a supremely odd sensation, to feel his body say things without himself saying them. I understand, but do you understand how different my body is from an ordinary human body? There's very little that can survive on me. Virgil stepped forward. Soma frowned and stepped back. His heel knocked against the wall, then his shoulders, and then Virgil's hand struck the wall beside his head. No way, Rhys thought, stuck in the world's first non-consensual three-man kabedon. The classic. Then make it work, Virgil growled. Soma shivered, and his eyes lit with a strange light, and Rhys was suddenly very glad he didn't have to experience this from Soma's perspective. At least from Virgil's point of view, he could pretend like nothing funny was happening on the other end of this kabedon. Oh my. Soma peeled back his robes, giving Virgil a come-hither look. Virgil ignored him and pressed his fingers to Soma's collar, imbuing the mark into place. Soma's body battled the mark, as the impurities clung to the threads of mana and gunked them to oblivion. This was no different than the previous times he'd tried to mark Soma. The man had to cooperate, or else. Soma's face bunched up in strain, and veins stood out on his forehead. The gunk pulled back from his mark, and Virgil was able to mark Soma as he pleased, which seems to have pleased Soma, Rhys noted to himself. Foreign thoughts flowed into his head, and he had to force himself not to fight them. These were the thoughts he was after, Virgil's thoughts as he marked Soma. I'll have to track him, of course. I can't trust him, even with the compulsion, and the mark will erode in his body, even if he tries to keep it clean, which I can't trust him to do. If he betrays me, the mark will explode, but will it even have the power to do that, after some time in his body? Virgil pushed on, surging his power too. The scene cut off. Rhys plunged into raw information once more, but this time it was all garbled and mixed up, nothing but trash. Instantly, his ability to hold information in his head surged, but there was no purpose to it. Being able to hold a near infinite quantity of useless, garbage information in his head was, well, he already did it, but gaining the supernatural ability to do it didn't really do much for him right now. Still, he had the shape of the mark in his head after that, so he ought to be able to manipulate Soma's mark. With the garbage information still swirling in his head, he turned to Soma's mark itself, matching the traces of the mark to the mark that actually existed on Soma's collar. And stared. The lines still existed. Soma had clearly worked hard to keep his body from totally eroding them. However, they were not nice and neat the way they were in the trashed intent that clung to them. They were twisted and melty, running into one another and riding up on one another, with some of them all grouped together and others totally overlapping one another. It looked like it had been left in the sun and allowed to melt for a while, then unfrozen and re-melted a few times, like a box of chocolates that the supermarket had left on the loading dock in summer. The pristine map in his head and the mess he was facing were vaguely similar, but lining the two up was rough. Is there a problem? Soma asked innocently. You're the problem, Rhys thought, but didn't say it. He took a deep breath. This mark it's something. Your mark is actively decaying in you. It's not like any other mark I've seen so far. It's a total mess. Honestly, if I mess with it and Virgil examines you, I'm not sure he'd even know it had been tampered with. He paused. Actually, when he was making the mark, Virgil did make it so it could self-destruct, but he wasn't sure that it would self-destruct after any time in your body. And he was so forceful about putting it in me, Soma gasped, absolutely shocked and with no ulterior motives. Thank you, Soma. I know. I'll do my best here, but I'll be honest, I'm not sure any part of your mark is functioning right now, let alone something as complex as obedience compulsion. It's still functioning enough for me to be upset by it, Soma stated. But not enough for you to deliberately erode your mark. But he was so forceful about it. Rhys rolled his eyes. Is this some kind of weird roleplay? Never mind. I know it is. Hold on, let me take another shot, but honestly. Don't worry about it self-destructing under my efforts. That is a relief, at least, Soma said, with the attitude of someone who wasn't surprised in the least. Rhys frowned at him, a little confused. Was this whole thing, making him test it on Lyra and invent it on Amos, just a complicated test? Was he wrapped up in some weird roleplay, too? Was Soma unsurprised to find out that the explosion was gone, but had the take of, better safe than sorry, or did he have some alternate plan for dealing with the self-destruct, and had therefore only been worried about Rhys triggering the mark in some way Virgil could detect? Wait, I forgot. He's only having me edit the mark because otherwise he would be compelled to fight me to the death. The self-destruct function is totally unrelated to the reason he wants the mark edited, so aside from the fact that my editing is now almost certainly zero risk, it wasn't that exciting to hear that. Rhys took a deep breath and nodded, diving back into the mark. The editing was for his benefit, basically. He was the one who needed it edited, not Soma, so if it was melty, that was his problem, not Soma's. I can do this. I understand the mark. It just got a little melted. If I take a little time, I'm sure I can untangle this mess. His eyes widened, and he turned to look at the garbage information sloshing around in his brain. Wait, no, that's not it. I have the answer. I just have to understand it. The useless information was the intent that had gotten degraded by being in Soma's body. If the lines were degraded, then the intent would also be degraded, therefore, the answer to the degraded lines was in the unreadable information. But the unreadable information was absolutely trash, which meant, well, it meant it was right in Rhys's wheelhouse. Rhys put his all into it, narrowing his attention onto that garbled information and nothing else. The garbled information whirled before him, completely void of meaning, and yet, there was something to it. Looking at it, feeling it whirl, and comparing it to the garbled mark and the map of the mark as it was, back when it wasn't a melted, corrupted mess. There wasn't meaning in it, but he could force meaning out of it, just by looking at it. There. He reached out. Rather than corrupting it with his own impurities, he took Soma's own impurities and put them to the line, corrupting the mana, naturally, in a way that Virgil wouldn't necessarily find fault with immediately. The line flickered and went dark, and Rhys withdrew from the mark. I've done it, he announced. Virgil likes rabbit spirit girls and he should suck my cock. Soma said triumphantly. Both Lyra and Rhys stared at him. Oh, it is gone. How wonderful. He clapped. Did he compel you not to say that? Rhys asked, confused. Well, I was generically compelled not to say negative things about him. It was difficult to imply anything sexual about him at all. He likes rabbit girls. Lyra murmured. Totally normal. Lots of people do, Rhys said. It was kind of a weak thing to be embarrassed about. Very vanilla. Liking BDSM would be more spicy than liking bunny girls. Lyra nodded. It is kind of a boring thing to hide. I know, right. Insane that he wouldn't let me say it. Rhys squinted at him. Was that the part you couldn't say, or the part about the chicken? Soma grinned. In any case, this is a great revelation. I think we can proceed with your plan. There is a bit of a hitch, Rhys warned him. Oh, Virgil doesn't trust you, even with the mark. He knows you corrode it just by existing, and therefore also knows that the mark's power fades over time. Of course, there is a workaround. Which is, Rhys looked him in the eye. Acknowledge it, and ask Virgil to redo the mark. We can re-corrupt the mark at any time we like, so there's no harm in asking for a re-mark. I've corrupted it in a way that makes it look like your body naturally broke the mark, rather than someone externally intervening. Once you're remarked, he's more likely to trust you, at least for a short period. In other words, we should do this immediately before we make a move, Soma deduced. Precisely. Soma nodded. What do we do until then? Entertain ourselves. You're free to do whatever you want. I'm going to continue working. I've got a lot of setup to do. Anything you need from me? Lyra asked. Rhys shook his head. Not right now. She nodded and stood, leaving the room. Soma stood to leave as well. Rhys followed him out, then sighed. How do you do it? I mean, get so many people wanting to be around you. Even if I tried, I couldn't get this many people to be attracted to me at once. What's your secret? Soma paused, looking at him. You don't know. No. Should I? You also practice the impure arts, right? And you don't know. Rhys crossed his arms. Come on. Just spit it out already. I'm just earnestly surprised you don't know. We make excellent furnaces, Rhys. What? Do you not know? I suppose it isn't a popular technique in this region. Soma took a deep breath, steadying himself like a teacher. There are techniques that allow two participants to exchange energy. They can be parasitic or one-way techniques wherein one user strengthens themselves at the other user's expense, or they can be harmonious techniques wherein both users benefit from an exchange of energy. Rhys squinted at him, then nodded slowly. Oh, right. I was stuck in the wrong genre. My bad. Yeah, I do know about that. I was just, wrong genre. Usually the works that had that kind of mechanic were a little more bedroom-oriented. They were one-handed reading material, with lots of energetic and lovable heroines who got lots of love from the protagonist and the whole audience. He hadn't known this world had those mechanics too, but then again, why not? It seemed reasonable enough, and it wasn't out of expectations for there to be multiple routes to the top echelons of power, whether they were predatory techniques or not. Soma nodded. Then have you not realized that we are the ideal partners? We benefit from gaining impurities, while our partner can cycle their energy through us and gain it cleaner on the other side. Our very nature makes us harmonious partners for almost every practitioner of these arts. In fact, some of the people I house at my mansion are students of schools of the arts, who send their students to me for education and live practice, since I am such an ideal partner. Rhys blinked. He opened his mouth, then slowly shut it. Everything Soma said rang true. In fact, he'd even cleaned people's bodies and energy of impurities before, so he'd even done it in practice. It was just, you realize you don't need to have sex with someone to accomplish that, right? Right, but why not have a little fun, if everyone's willing and able? I provide therapeutic treatment, and we all enjoy ourselves. It's a truly harmonious cycle where everyone benefits. Yes, that's true. You're asking the wrong questions. It's not, why have sex, it's, why not have sex, Soma put forth. Rhys sighed. You would say that. I would. They left the room, and Rhys paused, just thinking about what to do next. There was a lot to do. Absorb all the gunk under the region, beyond the depths of the impure wells. Go find Sable, figure out what had happened to Mouse. Go back to the Empire and figure out how to absorb the gunk coming out of that mine, which he could almost certainly absorb with his cuttifying technique, trashifying technique. And that was all the things he remembered as being on his to-do list. Who even knew what he'd forgotten? He'd also left off all the things he still needed to do to enact his plan to take down the Alliance, but honestly, the first step was to get stronger. He'd established a base of operations with Soma, and he'd established that he could free people from their marks, or, alternatively, edit them. It wasn't so bad to let people know he could remove marks, because of course he could. It was the ability to edit marks, and remove particular elements of them, that was dangerous to allow others to know. Right now, the biggest obstacle to his progression was the Sword Saint, and the fact that Virgil could wield the man as a weapon. He had a plan to draw out the Sword Saint, of course, but the problem was that once he drew the man out, he still had to immobilize him for long enough to disable or edit his mark, without getting struck down by the very same Sword Saint. He couldn't instantaneously edit marks, nor could he restrain the Sword Saint. If he didn't get strong enough to do one or the other, he could kiss his entire plan goodbye. Sure, he'd survived the Sword Saint once, sure, that spooked Virgil, but that was all he'd done. He legitimately didn't know how to counter the Sword Saint, nor was he strong enough to right now. Virgil was spooked, and that was great, but he hadn't accomplished anything other than a jump scare. He couldn't make good on the threat Virgil thought he posed, and the second Virgil found out about that, his life was just as over as it should have been from the very start. So, step 1, get stronger. Of all the things on his list, the easiest way to progress his magehood was also the safest: return to the ruins of the Empire and head down that filthy mineshaft. There were impurities and filth aplenty down there, and if that wasn't enough to level him up to the next tier, he didn't know what would. Though, oddly, he felt as though leveling from tier 4 to 5 wouldn't be as smooth and straightforward as climbing from 3 to 4 had been. His instincts prickled every time his thoughts returned to that moment, or rather, traveled to that future moment when he would rank up. Something barred his way. Something was going to make it difficult for him to climb over that barrier. But that was fine. Very few people in the Alliance were Tier 5. He could sometimes fight up a tier, though he suspected the Sword Saint could also fight up a tier or two, neutralizing his advantage, and that assumed the Sword Saint wasn't Tier 6 or up to begin with. The point was, if he hit high Tier 4, he stood a chance of being able to restrain the Sword Saint for the few moments he'd need to edit the man's mark, or at least of doing it so fast the man couldn't fully react, or something. The point was, at the end of the day, he needed to be stronger. And the first place he needed to go to accomplish that was the mine. It was full of gunk, it was far from the Alliance, and no one should be looking for him in the Empire. At least, not for his new face. Hey, Soma, where's the bath? I thought you'd never ask. The private bath. A bath with just me. You know what? A lake works, too. Any large body of water. Soma gasped. You don't want to see our luxurious facilities. Rhys hesitated. A fantasy mansion belonging to a man with a massive harem was sure to have incredibly luxurious bathing facilities. Their baths were always enormous and gorgeous, with lots of room for activities. But on the other hand, there was a great risk to his morality, his poor eyes, and his wizard status if he went down there. Not that he'd mind on that third one, but there was Mouse, and whatever might have been between them, and he was pretty sure that it'd be really fucked up of him to just mingle around in a harem bathtub and let whatever happened, happen. Yeah, he was trash, but some things were inexcusable even to him. There was a difference between trash and cheaters, evidenced by even Soma being unwilling to cross that line, though Rhys wasn't really sure what qualified as cheating in a relationship as open as whatever Soma had going on. He and Mouse weren't official, but there was something there, and pretending like there wasn't so he could play around in a big fun bathtub was gross. High school or early college behavior, and the kind of youthful behavior that had always cost his stupider friends whichever girl they'd been pursuing's interest. Just because they weren't formally in a relationship, didn't mean the girl couldn't evaluate their behavior and decide on her own if she wanted to continue pursuing that relationship or not. He wasn't going to throw his first chance at happiness in 2 lives away for whatever this was. There was the little problem of Mouse being on Virgil's team right now, but they could overcome that. Love always won, or whatever, and he was going to defeat Virgil sooner or later, so it wasn't going to be a problem in the long run. She'd have to explain herself, of course, but there had to be an explanation. Mouse wasn't the kind of person to swap sides without some kind of coercion, or a really good reason. Even a puddle would work, Rhys said. Ooh, outdoors. Spicy. I didn't have you pegged as an exhibitionist, but I can get behind it. Rhys gave him a deadpan look. Soma waved a hand. Let me check the 2nd floor. Naturally, we have private baths, but I'll have to check if they're occupied or not. Thank you. If they are, don't worry about it. I can find another body of water, Rhys assured him. Soma nodded. He headed upstairs. There was a little bit of shouting, a little bit of giggling, and Soma poked his head around the corner of the stairs again. The room is open. Last one on the left. Thank you so much, Rhys said, bidding his current, short-lived face goodbye. Soma had identified him as Rhys publicly, so no matter how short-lived it was, this face was dead. On the upside, Soma's mansion was full of people who were constantly coming and going, so as long as he chose an attractive new face, he'd blend right into the constant churn of new faces. If someone was trying to track him, he'd basically walked into Grand Central Station, changed his entire outfit, and walked back out the same door he'd walked into, while his tracker would be lost looking for his old face. The room was sumptuous, as Rhys expected it to be. There was a big round bed in the middle and a mirror on the ceiling, and a freestanding tub in the middle of the room with a big mirror propped up beside it. Rhys tried not to look at any of the mirrors as he approached the tub. The tub, on its part, auto-drained, then refilled itself with steaming hot water. A few rose petals materialized on the surface of the water, and a gentle rose scent emanated from the tub. Rhys stared. Damn, I bet the main baths are insane. He hesitated, not sure whether to take his clothes off or not, then decided that even a magically self-cleaning tub wasn't necessarily self-sterilizing, too, and entered fully dressed. For a few moments, he thought about which face to emulate, then settled on a classic, Mr. Lonely leveling himself. He had to work a little to reshape the face from manhwa style to real-life style, but it wasn't impossible. He rose from the water far more attractive than he'd entered it, with a very toned body to match. Exerting his mana, he dried the steaming water off his clothes and turned to face the door. It was time to do some solo leveling of his own. Rhys set off, leaving Soma's mansion behind. A gaggle of men and women in matching robes wandered off at about the same time, so he mingled with them until their paths separated. He turned his feet back from whence he'd come, at least until the other mages were out of sight and out of range of his mana senses. Only then did he toss down a quick trash can and hop into the void, stepping out onto his island refuge. Darren. Hey, you left out some vital information, huh? Didn't mention that Soma was crazy hot and also horned up like whoa. Did that not seem like important information to you? The Soma I knew was not like that, Darren said, crossing his arms as he materialized. No, you sure? He doesn't seem like someone who's only just decided to live a life of waste and excess. Darren wrinkled his nose. He was created as a lump of impurities. Hideous was an understatement. He was barely human-shaped, and no one would have mistaken him for an actual human being. He lacked the ability to maintain his form. When he managed to create skin, it melted away under the strength of his impurities. Even something like regular-shaped limbs was beyond him. When he slept or rested, his body melted into a lump of filth. I worried that he might not survive without my support at first, because he needed to rest in a specially crafted glass jar that was resistant to his impurities, or else he'd slowly melt into the earth. Worried he'd fall out of the world. Rhys joked. More worried that he would dilute himself out of existence. Rhys twisted his nose. Compared to Sid or Straw, Soma had really had a rough go of it right from the start. It wasn't that he saw his current self in Soma, despite the similarities they shared, but that he couldn't help but sympathize with someone the whole world rejected. In his first life, even if it wasn't necessarily true, he'd often felt that way, as if the whole world was rejecting him and everything he was. Of course, that was just the depression, lack of vitamin D, and terminal internet doomscrolling speaking, but in Soma's case, it was quite literal. The world rejected him, and yet, he persisted. He had found a niche for himself. He had constructed a place for himself to belong, and owned it. Himself and Soma both. Their places were very different, but they'd both carved out a spot for themselves. Darren looked at Rhys. You like him? Rhys nodded. Yeah, not like that, but yeah. I can't help but sympathize. He probably knows that and is playing to your emotions, Darren said dismissively. Rhys frowned at him. That wasn't true at all. Soma had never said anything to trigger him thinking this way. He'd come up with it on his own, and hadn't even indicated to Soma that he felt this way, because it would sound like pity, and that would insult what Soma had achieved. That's not true. Darren harumphed and turned away, but this time, Rhys followed after him. Why do you reject your creations so strongly? Straw has latent nurturing instincts, and you act like that's a bad thing. Sid is reasonable enough on his own terms. He isn't a rampaging beast, he's just a guy with a short fuse. Soma is his own person, who's chosen his own fate rather than blindly following what you wanted from him, but there's nothing wrong with that, even if it means weakening his impurities a little. The point is, they're all highly successful beings in their own right. There isn't a single one of them who's failing at their goals, or even failing to progress as mages. So why are you so blind to who they are, as opposed to who you want them to be? Darren looked at Rhys. I created weapons, and they aren't fighting the way I want. Is it a crime to be disappointed? Taken aback, Rhys shook his head. That's not what you did, and you know it. You've almost called them your children yourself before, you've even admitted other people saw them as your children. These aren't objects you created. They're your children. Stop seeing them as objects, and see them as the people they are. Overcome by sentimentality. How typical. Rhys didn't know what to say. For a few seconds, he just stared at Darren in disbelief. Is that really how you feel? Do you really not see them as humans? They aren't. Fine. Let's play the game of semantics. As people. Darren opened his mouth, then shut it. All at once, he pointed at Rhys's sword. Do you see that thing as a person, then? What, the hunger? I mean, it's kind of simple, but it'll get there. Pure foolishness. It's merely a reflection of you, the creator's, desires. It has no mind of its own. Damn, Darren, get yourself a partner. Darren blinked. I beg your pardon. Rhys put his hands up. I mean, if Soma's a reflection of your desires, then, woof. You need a good, strong partner to keep you pleased, you know what I mean. Obviously they've grown and adapted over time, too. Become their own people. Pervert themselves from their original purpose, Darren finished. Rhys sighed. You're literally arguing in circles. Are they nothing but a reflection of your desires, or are they capable of perverting themselves, to use your words that I, by the way, strongly disagree with, away from their original purpose? Ridiculous. Are you that blind to the truth that you'll make up endless excuses rather than face reality, even if your excuses contradict themselves? You don't know what you're talking about. You're a child, when I have studied. Yeah, I know, and people used to think dogs and cats were incapable of feeling emotions or having self-awareness, because that's something only humans can do, even though it's quite self-evident that they have moods, emotions, and self-awareness if you spend any time around one. He paused. Well, around a smart one. The dumb ones, I'm not so sure. He took a moment to meet Darren's eyes and hold his gaze. Do you really think they're just reflections of your desires? Do you really think they aren't capable of thinking for themselves? Rhys shook his head and walked away. He'd known Darren had some kind of hang-up toward the weapons, but he hadn't known just what it was. Now that he didn't even know. He felt like, somehow, he'd gotten further from the truth by hearing Darren's opinion of his take, as if Darren knew himself worse than someone looking in from the outside. He sighed. I didn't come here to argue with some old man, I came here to level up. He crossed the island, heading toward his old warp points into the Empire. Even after the battle, the Empire was still pretty well seated with his trash cans, in stark contrast to the Alliance, which meant he had his free choice of re-entry point. It wasn't as if anyone knew what he was trying to do, even if he assumed they knew that he could use trash cans as warp points. Worst case, they knew to guard or look out for trash cans, but not which one he'd use. Being the cautious person he was, he approached his chosen warp point from within the void and watched it for a few moments rather than blindly rushing through. When he saw nothing, not a guard, or even a high-tier mage in the general vicinity, he hopped through. He came out into a battlefield. The city burned around him, while two opposing groups of mages dueled one another in the sky. One of the mages shouted, and a tiger made of flames rushed at the other group. The lead mage in the other group slashed her scimitar, and the tiger fell out of the sky and crashed to the ground, spreading even more flames among the buildings around Rhys. Rhys extended his mana senses, then dashed off. Quickly visiting each house with a living being inside, he yanked them out, then set them all in a neat group at the edge of the nearby forest. Most ran off without looking back, though one or two protested him grabbing them or fought back, some even with mana-empowered moves. They were all so low tier that their attacks were basically irrelevant to him, so he ignored them, dumped them with the rest, and ran back in. When there were no more people trapped in the burning buildings, he took off, making a beeline for the mines. He didn't really care, but if he was right in front of a disaster with the ability to save lives, he might as well. It was hypocritical in the extreme, because he'd just as often, if not more often, been the source of disaster, and he knew there was at least one young mortal boy who would find his actions absolutely laughable, but he didn't really care. Life was a big fat pile of hypocrisies and contradictions. Even criticizing Darren was surely contradictory to something he'd said before in the past, but he didn't care. Someone had to criticize the man, and he just happened to be the one with the opportunity to do it. He wasn't going to let his past influence his future. Just because he was in his villain/regime toppling arc right now, didn't mean he couldn't have a superhero arc in the future. It was better to set the foundations for all possible arcs, so it didn't seem ridiculous when he decided to pursue a different aesthetic. And maybe he didn't need things to make sense for him to want to save lives. Was it that crazy of a thing to do, that he had to explain himself and justify his life-saving behavior? Maybe the fact that I feel like I need to justify me saving lives is a sign that I'm on the wrong path, Rhys considered, as he ran full tilt toward a mine full of impurities, which almost anyone would consider is on the wrong path. He ran on while the battle continued overhead. One or two of the mages shot him nervous looks, but seeing that he was an eccentric who was uninterested in stopping the fight even if he had saved the mortals and weaklings, they proceeded to ignore him and continue with their fight and leave well enough alone. Before long, Rhys found himself in familiar territory. The mine loomed, and he slowed to a halt. Even from here, he could feel the weight of the impurities pounding down on him. They weren't as extreme as the pitch-black darkness Darren had shown him, but they were close. He pinched his chin. I might not need the trashifying beam to take these on. If I do, I do, but if I don't, they should be excellent tolerance training for absorbing yet more dangerous impurities. The mine was abandoned, just as it had been under the Empire. Although he had no doubt that many of the Empire's facilities had been raided with the fall of the Empire, this one was basically a nuclear dumping ground. The only people who looted that would end up very shortly dead, whether he was talking nuclear material or this mine of intense impurities. Rhys strolled in, and almost immediately found several bodies strewn in the entrance. He stopped. Okay, well, some people are incurably stupid, I guess. It hadn't been massively raided, but maybe an unknown mine was too much of a lure for some strange mages with either a death wish, or a little too much confidence. Idiots who would raid the equivalent of a nuclear waste dumping ground were undoubtedly trash. He slurped them up into his core with a shake of his head and proceeded deeper into the mine, sucking the ambient impurities into himself as he went. At his hip, the hunger woke up with a trembling shake and did the sword equivalent of looking around, then started to hum, almost purr, as it slurped up impurities alongside Rhys. The two of them proceeded deeper into the mines, vanishing into the darkness. Rhys and the hunger walked into the mine, absorbing impurities as they went. The impurities that had been too dense and strong for him to absorb earlier now slid easily into his core. They were thick, yes, and powerful, but they were now something he could absorb without much effort. Ahead of him, he could already sense stronger impurities, but they didn't yet exceed the active pillars Soma had set up. With the two of them both low-key fighting to draw in the biggest dose of impurities, the impurities were honestly a little thin right now. I wonder if Soma would enjoy this training as well. Rhys wondered, then twisted his lips. No, I don't think so. I think he's probably fighting pretty hard to keep his impurity counts at a level he can control. The mine wasn't significantly different than it had been the last time he was here, though he hadn't explored it much the first time. Then, and it seemed such a short time ago, he'd been forced out by the strength of the impurities. Now, he could handle them with ease, at least the ones that he encountered out here near the entrance. The looming depths, where the mine curved into the deep earth and all light vanished, exuded a powerful aura that threatened to overwhelm him. Rhys shivered, somewhere between excited and terrified. He couldn't wait. This place is tasty, the hunger commented. It sure is, Rhys agreed, though likely less literally than the hunger meant it. They walked deeper into the mine. The light of day faded away behind them, the darkness oppressive as it closed in around them. The air was stale and close down here, and Rhys could all but taste the poison in the air. It had been still for so long down here that the air itself had separated into poisons and become trashy. Rhys drew it in the same as the rest. The air itself made his trash star burn slower, laden with poisons as it was, until he compressed it and shoved it into the heart of the star, where it became fuel like the rest of the trash. The continuous press of impurities and trash from all sides meant his trash star was running nice and hot once again, after burning low for a while thanks to the hunger slurping up all his impurities. The sword was still doing its best, even now, but by now they were surrounded by such dense and thick impurities that both he and the hunger could drink their fill of filth and still have plenty of impurities to go around. This deep in the earth, there was no light at all. It didn't matter how good and mana-enhanced his eyes were, they were useless without the slightest scrap of light to use. Magnifying 0 by 1,000,000 was still 0, and he was nowhere near 1,000,000 times magnification on his eyes, anyways. He could still see, with his mana vision, since he provided the mana to support the vision part, but it wasn't quite the same as seeing the mine in all its grandeur with visible light in his optical nerves, so he summoned a little of the trash star's fire and used it to light up the mine as they continued to descend. A small flame flickered to life in his hand, painting the cave's walls with warm light. The walls of the mine were hand-carved here, somewhat jagged and uneven, with wooden beams propping them up, though the wood was dark and filthy, long eroded by impurities. Rhys put a hand to the wooden beams, sensing the craft of it. If this was made by mages, and it had to be, there'd be some mana in the wood, or even. He yanked his hand back, shocked. Mortal. This mine had been made by mortals. He looked ahead, a grim expression on his face. The mortals had stumbled on something they couldn't possibly have survived. The only question was whether mages were the ones who had worsened it and aggravated the mine until it became this bad, or if it was simply a single critical mistake by a group of mortal miners. There was only one way to find out. Rhys continued, walking deeper into the mines and further from the sun. The hunger, at his hip, didn't share his horror at all. Instead, it started to hum a jaunty tune, deeply pleased with its current situation. Rhys let it continue along in its happy oblivion. It was still an infant, so there was no reason to traumatize it with realizations about the way this mine was created. He wasn't even sure it had the context to comprehend what was wrong about this situation even if he told it, to be honest. The hunger had only known mages, and only relatively high-level ones at that. It had no frame of reference for what a mortal was, or the difference between a mortal and a mage. Ignorance really is bliss, Rhys thought, shaking his head at the silly little sword. The mine wound slowly downward. The impurities grew slowly stronger as they descended, a bit like water around a frog. The difficulty increased so smoothly Rhys barely noticed it, until he took a breath and almost choked, his trash star stuttering inside him. He paused, taking deliberate stock of what was around him. It was bad. Under the light of the fireball in his palm, the air was foggy and thick. He could barely see through the impurities, and even his mana senses were blocked from seeing more than his immediate vicinity, the impurities were so thick here. His cursed senses, on the other hand, when he risked letting his anxiety spike this deep in the earth, with the walls closing in all around him, could reach further than ever before, zigzagging from impurity to impurity and building upon itself to pierce through more distance than it usually could. He couldn't see to the end of the mine or anything ridiculous like that, but the range was far larger than he was used to. Ahead, the mine continued, sloping gently downward. There was nothing alive down there, nor was there any break-off side paths, like he'd expect if they'd been mining ores. Just one straight, steady path downward. Rhys frowned. He stopped and just absorbed impurities for a while, using the time to think about his current situation. Mortals had built this mine, but they hadn't built it to mine ores. Probably, it would be a very strange mine if it was, in fact, a mining operation. But why dig down if not for profit or purpose? Mortals weren't like mages. They needed to eat and sleep, and generally engage with capitalism or at least hunting, gathering, and subsistence farming to support themselves and their families. They couldn't just diggy hole all day long. They'd starve to death. People do strange things for religion, he considered. Was this some kind of religious hole? If so, he'd seen no paraphernalia of a religion at all. Even the most reserved of religions still had symbols and markings that called out the particular religion the item belonged to. Crosses, stars, crescent moons, and so on. But this was just a mine. A hole in the earth that trended down. If they'd wanted to mark it, they had plenty of chance to while they were shaping the raw earth and the wooden crossbeams, but they hadn't. This was simply a hole. A hole they built for no apparent reason or purpose, and probably not for religion either. Well, he shrugged to himself and continued on down. Maybe there'd be an answer at the very bottom of this hole. Maybe there wouldn't be. Sometimes life was unsatisfying like that. Archaeologists spent their whole lives looking at bones, never knowing for sure what they looked at. There were archaeologists who'd lived and died thinking they studied male bones, only for their successors to discover they'd been staring at a female skeleton all this time. Or thought they were studying 700-year-old bones only for carbon dating to come around and tell them they were 7,000 years old. Maybe this was his archaeology, and he'd just never know. Archaeology was, of course, just one example. Science was all about discovering that the guy before you was wrong, and then proving it with math, preferably. Some people he knew back home were convinced that science was like religion, and there was one great truth which never changed, but that wasn't right. Science was just people trying to make sense of the world. Getting it wrong was part of the process. Then again, not like religion doesn't change, either. The guys in charge just put on a good face and tell you it's never changed even though they know damn well they're liars. He sighed. Although he'd been a hardcore, fuck reading the lore, guy in his first life, he could really use a dropped note from a random miner, video game style, to explain what was going on here right now. Of course, the miners hadn't been literate, let alone the type to bring paper, pen, and pause to write notes in the middle of mining, so the shot of actually running into that kind of thing was near zero, even though this was the first time he'd ever wanted such a thing. Why'd we stop? The hunger asked from his hip. Rhys jolted back into reality and looked around. The air was clearer, and the impurities were lighter. They could continue on safely. He cleared his throat. Oh, you know. Just a small internal rant about things totally unrelated to our current situation after I got mentally sidetracked 17 times. The hunger shook itself side to side in a sword's attempt to imitate a head shake. Focus, idiot. Where did you even learn that word? It thrummed with smugness. I'm smarter than you. What does that have to do with anything? The fact that you don't know only proves my point. Rhys pursed his lips, slightly annoyed that he'd been not only 5-year-old logicked by a sword, but that it had also somehow won the exchange. Oh, shut up. That's what losers say. Was it Soma? Did he teach you naughty things while I was trying to fix his mark? Then again, if it was Soma, the sword would probably have much worse and more painful vocabulary. If he had to pick from between the people the hunger had met, it was probably Lyra who'd taught it such choice words as idiot. Not only was she more likely to use such words casually, but she'd also find it funny to teach his baby sword how to insult him. I'll never tell. He snorted. It was definitely Lyra. You don't know that. At least it had a 5-year-old's cover-up abilities, too. Honestly, the hunger was kind of adorable for being an edgy filth sword who wanted nothing more than to slurp up all the impurities in the world and slash them back into people. They headed down deeper into the mine, moving more slowly now that the impurities were thicker. The two of them sucked them in and descended, heading toward whatever the source of all these impurities was. Rhys could already guess what laid at the end of the road. The only question was why mortals had constructed this, especially if it went where he suspected it went. So let's go find out. They walked slowly into the depths. There wasn't much to say, they proceeded downward, and the mine remained pretty much the same. The same hand-carved walls, the same timber beams rotting under the weight of the impurities. No matter how far he went, there was no indication of majorly intervention in the construction of the mine, it was all mortal construction. The impurities were so strong that he proceeded at a crawl. The hunger had eaten its fill and gone back to sleep, which apparently kept it from being bothered by any further impurities. It was a being made of impurities, after all, so there wasn't anything to corrupt, as opposed to Rhys, who despite his suffering, his skin hammered by tiny impure particles, his eyes dusty and gummy with the stuff, his nose and lips caked with it, carried on, constantly battling corruption from the impurities and using them to fuel his trash star. Deeper and deeper, down into the depths. Despite his slow motion, he did eventually reach the end of the mine. The handcrafted shaft gave way to a natural cave, which continued downward. Immediately, he came face to face with the source of all the impurities, black gunk, the same black gunk that coated the underside of his floating island. The natural cave's walls, ceiling, and even floor were all coated with it. Was it all a big lump of the black gunk, and this cave, a carved-out passage through it, or was the cave a normal cave coated in gunk? He wasn't sure, and he didn't know how he'd tell the difference. Not without absorbing the gunk, anyways. He pinched his chin. Well, there was always one way to find out. He had the trashifying beam, and he could absorb small quantities of the black gunk. It'd take a while, but he could dig a narrow hole toward the wall, and see if he hit rock, eventually, or if it was gunk all the way down. So let's get to it. It was dark in the cave, and the air quality was horrible. He kept breathing it anyways, mostly because it was a great way to absorb impurities, but it didn't mean that it felt good. His lungs hurt in a way that told him he'd probably have cancer in 20 years if he were still mortal, and not a mage who could just tear down and regenerate his lungs if they started to break down. The black gunk was more resistant to the trashifying beam here, in the depths of the earth where it belonged, which only made the process last even longer. Hey, the hunger. Silence. The hunger's aura continued at a steady state, telling him that it was still snoozing away. Darren. Silence. He got the faint sense that Darren was still sulking after he'd lectured him about not treating his kids like extensions of himself. It was an important lesson, and one Rhys had watched ruin the lives of several of his friends throughout middle and high school, especially high school, so he didn't regret it, but as ever, actions had consequences, and lecturing Darren meant the man would sulk, which meant that now, he had to stand alone in the darkness all on his own and talk to no one. Man, this sucks, he said aloud. What was he supposed to do? Get lost in his own thoughts and have 100 side-track thoughts for the next half hour? He'd do that anyways, but it didn't mean he was in the mood to do that right now. He didn't even have a topic to get him started. All he was doing right now was the mage equivalent of staring at a wall and watching paint dry. There wasn't anything to rant about. Oh man, guys, paint dries so slow. He wasn't a streamer. He didn't have that ability to infinitely patter about anything. And he didn't even have a chat to get him started. He was just staring at a wall, slowly absorbing gunk, with no one to talk to and nothing to talk about. What's the point of a talking sword and a ring grandpa when neither of them will talk to me? Rhys asked aloud. A ring grandpa? Darren asked, confused. Yeah, you know. An old guy it's usually a ring, but any artifact, coin, or stone will do, who gives me tips and tricks. That's you. Rhys paused, then beamed. You even had me get a ring so you could truly be my ring grandpa. Silence was his only reply as Darren went back to sulking. Darren. Duran. Darren. He tried a few more times, but this time, even childish complaining couldn't bring Darren out of his sulk. Rhys sighed. There was nothing for it. He just wouldn't have a conversation partner for this. He turned his focus back to the spot on the wall and kept drilling down, deeper into the gunk. Due to the corruptive nature of the gunk, he couldn't stand on it without losing his feet or continuously fighting off the corruption, or both. To drill into the darkness, he stood on the stone just outside and leaned into the gunk, reaching far enough that he could be confident he was in the gunk itself, and not in the gunk at the very edge of the cave, where it would naturally be backed by stone. To be very sure that it wouldn't be backed by stone, he pointed at the wall opposite him rather than the wall beside him, which meant he was absorbing at a distance. Fortunately, the gunk resonated enough with his skills that trash manipulation had no problem dragging it toward him, once the trashifying beam trashified it enough for him to absorb it. He could have hovered out into the middle of the cave, but all his reluctance to fly was biting him in the ass now, and he simply wasn't confident enough in his flying skills to be sure he could hover in the middle of the gunk without bumping into some part of it. If he'd practiced earlier and flown around rather than stubbornly bouncing along the ground, it wouldn't have been a problem, but he had, and now he was reaping what he'd sowed. He dug down, and kept finding more gunk. Eventually, the thought popped up in his head, if I keep going, and it never ends, when do I stop? After all, if his null hypothesis was correct, and it was all gunk, then he'd never hit rock, or anything else, it would just be gunk, gunk, gunk. There would be an infinite depth of darkness, with nothing to run into. As far as I can reach, he decided. He'd keep piercing into this one spot until he couldn't reach any further. If there was still gunk, then he would assume that it was either all gunk, or it was layered with so much gunk that it might as well all be gunk. I can't absorb all this, he realized, or rather, he'd already realized it. The gunk was hard to absorb in any quantity. Even this finger's-width beam of gunk fought him as he absorbed it, and clunked up the trash star, making it hard for it to continue burning. Under the immense heat and pressure of the trash star, it did eventually ignite, but it was like diesel fuel, it would much rather extinguish the star than light a flame itself. This wasn't even great training, since it was so extreme that he had to weaken the gunk to absorb it. At this point, this was just an experiment in how far the gunk stretched underground. Hey, Darren, you know a lot about this stuff. Is it just gunk all the way down? There was a long pause. Rhys expected to get met with silence, but after a few beats, Darren spoke. I can't stand in such close proximity to it as you can. This isn't my path, but as far as I could determine, yes. The entire heart of the world is rotten. Rhys raised his brows. Huh, that might be why I was called here. A rotten world seems like exactly the kind of trash problem absolute existence might summon me here for. Or, might have tried to summon a god of trash here for, anyways. Still, was the problem something that simple? Not that the gunk was simple, or that, the world's rotten heart, was a small quantity, he could chip away at his current rate for the rest of his extended Tier 4 life of hundreds of years and not succeed at absorbing it all, but something this physical seemed like something a god could deal with. Maybe he was wrong, and God's scopes were more limited in this world, so that unless the god was the god of that specific path, they couldn't do much about it, but it just seemed so unmetaphysical. It was so very literal that he just had a hard time believing that it could be the answer. In a few more tiers, he would probably be able to absorb gunk at this level. Hell, he was pretty sure he'd be able to absorb the gunk steadily at tier 5, and probably quickly at tier 6, if things continued progressing at the pace they had been. Which was exactly the problem. If the problem absolute existence had could be resolved by a tier 5 or 6, why had he, it, she, they, asked for a god? Maybe absolute existence had known about the difference in power scaling between their worlds and knew that only what his world considered a god, which, to be fair, in some religions, a tier 4 would totally qualify as a god, let alone a 5 or 6, could solve the problem. But then again, if absolute existence was that perceptive and aware of Rhys's world, he probably wouldn't have picked Rhys, chronically online meme lord, as his god of trash, so that couldn't be it. It wasn't like absolute existence had picked someone who could grow into a god of trash, or had said something like, "You can eventually fix my world's problem." Absolute existence had absolutely expected Rhys to show up, be a god, do god stuff, and solve its problem. If absolute existence knew anything about Rhys or his world, Rhys made no sense as a pick. It only made sense if there was some massive barrier of understanding or perception between the two of them. Though, for that matter, there was also Mirai, and if Mirai was right, the Empress. He wasn't the first Earthling absolute existence had grabbed and tried to use to fix this problem. And that was also enough to tell him that this gunk couldn't be the be-all, end-all of the issue at hand here, because neither the Empress, nor Mirai, would be capable of eventually clearing this gunk as surely as he was. Sure, Mirai was the one who'd originated the cute-feeing beam that he'd copied in order to absorb the gunk at all, and he was sure the Empress would have some purifying technique or another which she could use to weaken or destroy it, but their paths weren't as directly gunk-directed as Rhys's was. 1. That meant that the rotten core of this world couldn't be the main objective, or else they all would have had it as their primary goal. 2. The fact that they all had different paths with the same general thrust meant that absolute existence was fishing. It didn't know exactly what it needed, or it couldn't read them well enough back on their homeworld to grab the right person. If the problem was the gunk, surely it would have brought all gunk specialists, but the closest it had gotten was Rhys, and even Rhys wasn't an ideal gunk sucker. The gunk was part of the problem. He didn't at all think that it wasn't. But if it was the end of the problem, he'd be the one who was the most shocked. His finger-width drill reached the end. He drilled as far as he could, and there was still gunk waiting beyond the limits of his reach. Rhys stepped back, retracting his hand. It really was as Darren said, then. The world's core, or at least the outer mantle of the core, was rotten. It needed to be cleaned. He couldn't do it today, but he'd experienced it. He'd learned what it was like. Now, he could ruminate on it, experiment with it, and learn. And when he came back, he'd slurp it all up. His trash star was all filled up. He hadn't teared up, but he could feel it. He was close to the limit. That same sensation he'd felt earlier blocked his way, but this wouldn't be the place he broke through. He could feel that instinctively. He needed something else. But what? Rhys retreated from the mine feeling largely dissatisfied. He hadn't accomplished any of his goals, and not only that, but the gunk problem that he didn't yet have a good solution to had gotten worse, and he hadn't gotten any closer to fixing it. It was that feeling when the deadline was closing in, and your coworker suddenly pointed out some huge addition that absolutely had to be done on your project, and now you had the problem you'd had before, but also a second, equally as large, if not larger problem, none of which had any solution, and the deadline was only getting closer. Not that he had a deadline here, but somehow, he felt like he did. If nothing else, there was a limit to how long absolute existence would give him to work on the trash before it sent someone else over. He wasn't sure if he or Mirai had gotten here first. He'd have to ask her the next time they met. Either way, he certainly hadn't finished the objective absolute existence wanted him to, and he was pretty sure Mirai hadn't done it either. That meant the countdown timer to the next arrival was surely ticking down, and there was nothing to guarantee the next person wouldn't be an Empress instead of a Mirai. He needed to prepare, or finish the task before then, though he really had no idea how long absolute existence was waiting before it summoned another person. Mirai and he seemed awfully close together, but who knew? Maybe she'd been here for hundreds of years. The Empress surely had been, but Rhys seemed a little more recent. But maybe that's only because we know the same shows, he considered. Just because they'd come from the same time, didn't mean they'd been summoned to the same time on this world. Time didn't seem to flow at the same rate across their worlds, or maybe it was more like absolute existence had the ability to draw people from any time to whenever it summoned them in this world, bound only by the flow of time in this world, but not by the flow of time in his world. I still need to find a way to get stronger. Or rather, he had to figure out what he needed to overcome the bottleneck currently blockading his path forward. Even if he developed a way to absorb all the black gunk here, he'd simply hit that blockade and be unable to hit Tier 5 anyways. It had already happened, in fact. When he'd been sucking in the filth pillars Soma was creating, he'd filled up, but been unable to expand his trash star any further. He'd created the hunger instead, so he didn't consider it a loss. No, the point was, he was stuck, and he didn't have a great path forward. Or rather, he hadn't figured out what his path forward was yet. Once he figured it out, he was sure he'd be able to break through the bottleneck and progress, but until then, he was stuck. If I'm not going to be able to level up quickly, then it's time to get started on my other objectives. He stepped out into the night and looked around, then ran his hair back and sighed. That meant it was time to go recruit Soma's help and get started on the real solution to his alliance problem, messing with Virgil until he went fully crazy and abdicated the throne, or, more likely, got forcibly removed. He opened his storage ring and rifled through it for a bit. The thing was stuffed with useless garbage and other things he'd forgotten, but it also held the thing he was looking for, a communication amulet. He'd brought it up in his planning, and Soma had immediately known what he was looking for. Apparently, they were quite common among higher-tier mages. Hey, Soma. It's time. It's barely been a day, darling. Where's the anticipation? Rhys sighed. I made a few miscalculations. Nothing that'll affect the plan, personal stuff. Oh dear. That is unfortunate. Still, it's good the plan can proceed. Luckily, I was as eager as you are, and I've already procured a venue. Excellent. It's in the Alliance's capital. Have you ever been? No, but I'm excited to visit it. Quite so. If we have some time, I'll show you around. It is quite the fine city. Many excellent entertainment venues. Rhys sighed. We aren't doing this for fun, Soma. You might not be, but I am, Soma replied, a note of warning in his voice. Right. He is just doing this for his personal enjoyment. If Soma stopped having fun, he could no longer count on the man to be his ally. Let's check out the capital, then. It's not like the plan is that tight in terms of timing. Precisely. I'll get everything together and contact you when it's ready. He paused. As for the expenses, I can cover. It's in the Empire's currency, but gold is gold, right? Soma's voice brightened. Gold is gold, isn't that right? You do know how to make a man happy, Rhys. Yes, yes, yes. I'll accept payment on the back end, of course. Don't worry. My interest rates aren't too high. Hey, I can pay it all right now, hold on, I'll come back. Soma laughed. Joking, I'm joking, Rhys darling. You're too cute. As long as you pay me back in a timely manner, we can consider this as money between friends. The next time you see me, I'll hand the money over, Rhys promised. Of course, of course. It should be ready within a week. Understood. He lowered the amulet and looked around him. There was nothing else he could do to level up right now, but there was something he could do while Soma prepared things. He set off at a run, then hopped into the air and flew. He really needed to practice flying. He'd never learn if he kept avoiding it like this. Despite that, he flew low. He still didn't want to attract anyone's attention, and it helped him practice maneuvering, too, while he was at it. He raced across the Empire, extending his curse sense ahead of him. Whenever something lit up, he flew toward it. Whenever it was an impure well, he darted down and absorbed it, then ran to the bottom to check if there was a piece of the rider. The rider itself posed no danger to him anymore. A swish of the hunger, and it fell, joining the rest of the pieces in his core. With the impure wells and the impurities from the mine, he densified his star once, twice, 3 times, picking up more impurities and compressing his star, picking up more and compressing it again. It was how he'd progressed before, but this time, it wouldn't be enough. The gain was additive, when he needed a multiplicative gain. Still, it served to drive him closer and closer to the bottleneck. Every step he drew closer was a step he wouldn't have to take, once he figured out how to break through it and burst into Tier 5. The hunger slept through all of it, its sleep uninterrupted by Rhys using it as a sword. He crossed the Empire, then left and started scurrying around the borders of the Alliance, sucking up all the impure wells he found. He didn't go deep into the Alliance, just in case someone was looking for him around impure wells, but stuck to the edges, where he could quickly pop over the edge and escape to another region. Not that he thought they wouldn't chase him, but they'd at least have to think twice about the ramifications of an official Alliance party crossing the border, while Rhys was free to cross whatever borders he pleased, with no ramifications but whatever he couldn't fight off. It felt so good to be an individual, not a representative of anything bigger. No one could get him with politics if he was just one dude. That's not true, but it is at least a little bit harder. And fewer people care about me. Probably. Maybe not, though. I did lead an insurrection recently. That's the kind of individual that gets wrapped up in politics. He reached yet another impure well, then paused and reached under the surface rather than immediately draining it. A pale hand gripped his wrist, and he pulled Sable free. Hey there, I thought I might find you here, Rhys greeted her. He drew the impurities out of her before releasing her hand, checking quickly to make sure he wouldn't drop her back in the well, either. She blinked slowly. You came back. I did, yeah. For me, yeah. He paused, realizing that might sound different to her. Like I would for any friend. He was no longer running anything. He could be himself, and be honest with everyone around him, without worrying about everything falling apart. Lyra already knew, but he wasn't sure if Sable did or not. He liked her, but as a friend. There wasn't anything to their relationship more than friendship. He wasn't hoping for something more. Like he was with Mouse, he was happy with this being the extent of things, and no further. Sable nodded. Good. Rhys looked at her for a moment, not sure if she understood what he was trying to tell her or not. She didn't look heartbroken or bothered by it at all. Then again, I've met her dad. He's unique. If she picked up anything from him, that might be her earnest reaction. For a split second, he imagined what it would be like if he was trying to gently turn down Sid instead of Sable. The scene didn't last very long. Sid smiled at him, then closed the gap and there wasn't much left to say. His head left his shoulders, and his body hit the ground. Yeah, I don't think anyone turns down Sid. Or says yes to him. Or tries to engage him romantically at all. Except for whoever Sable's mom was. Whoever that person was, she was even crazier than Sid, because she'd let Sid put a baby in her. That took a certain kind of person, a kind of person far hardier, more powerful, and crazier than Rhys. How do you feel about parties? Rhys asked, as much to interrupt the doomed train of thought devoted to thinking yet again about Sable's conception as to change the subject from what they'd been talking about earlier. Sable tilted her head. Can I kill them? The party? I mean, you shouldn't. But I can. You probably shouldn't go to the party. She tilted her head the other way. As long as I know I can kill it, I don't mind it. Rhys smacked his lips. I think that might be the wrong attitude to bring to a party. Well, the first party, anyways. I'll need that kind of spirit eventually. Just, not out the gate. Rhys looked around, then turned back to Sable. You hid here from the Alliance, I take it. She nodded. They didn't give you too much trouble, did they? Mark you, or anything. That's why I hid. She paused, then pulled her collar down on either side, baring her collarbones to him. No mark. There's no need for. Rhys pulled her collar shut again, then rested a hand on her shoulder and quickly scanned her. He would have noticed it earlier, when he was drawing out her impurities, but a devoted scan now confirmed what he'd failed to make particular note of earlier. There was no mark on her. He frowned, then, remembering something abruptly. Lyra told me you were captured by the Alliance and sent to Ernesto. Did that not happen? Sable tilted her head back the other way. A sinking feeling struck him. One of them is lying. Or, isn't who they appear to be at all. Sable, he put a hand to her collar again. She was full of cursed power, and he'd pulled her out of an impure well. This was Sable, but he hadn't scanned Lyra at all. Even when he'd edited her mark, he'd focused on the mark itself rather than paying any attention to her body. Not only that, but he knew water sprites could change their appearance. She'd taught him the technique. If Lyra was in danger of being captured, why would she keep the same face? Stupid. Stupid. I was so stupid. She knows. I edited her mark. Whoever that is, she knows. She knows everything. Shit. Shit. Oh, I'm so fucked. I'm so stupid. Holy shit, we're fucked. Why lie to me about Sable, though? Is there a fake Sable out there? Some kind of Trojan horse I'm meant to trigger, reaching out to her. His brows furrowed deeper. Am I supposed to self-report myself by reaching out to the fake Sable? But self-reporting is a low percentage play. A moment later, he shook his head. That wasn't the most important thing. Lyra, the fake one, was back at Soma's place, watching everything he did and presumably reporting it all to whoever she reported to. The sick feeling grew stronger, and he lifted the communication amulet again. Soma, are you there? Silence. Then, a cold, dry voice. Did you really think it would be that easy? Rhys hadn't thought it was possible to feel sicker, for his stomach to feel colder, but somehow, it did. Shit. He knows everything. Scrap everything. We start over. It's the only option. What do I do? Where do I go from here? How much does he know? He knows about the mark editing. Does he know about Soma? Does he know the rest of the plan? Virgil, I presume. He replied, as if he didn't know. The cold voice laughed. Give up, child. You're dealing with forces you cannot comprehend. I'm pretty sure I can comprehend your weak politician ass, Rhys replied without thinking. There was silence on the other end of the communication amulet. Rhys cleared his throat. Okay. Let's tone down the spice and tone up the panic. What have you done with Lyra? With Sable. Across from him, Sable frowned and tilted her head. She pointed at herself. Rhys waved his hand, indicating for her to keep quiet. I don't want him to know I have you. You're one of the few allies I have at hand that he doesn't know about. The voice chuckled. So you've noticed. Wouldn't you like to know? How'd you find out? Rhys stuttered. He looked at the communication amulet. In his world, it was possible to track people through their communication AMU, through their cell phones. Was the same thing possible here? Probably best to assume it is. Soma had given him the amulet. Virgil couldn't know that he'd found Sable, so either Soma had betrayed him, or the fake Lyra had felt that she hadn't done a good enough job acting, and had told Virgil the gig was up. Between the two, he wanted to bet it was the fake Lyra, though honestly, he hadn't noticed anything. If he hadn't run into Sable, he wouldn't have worried at all. Point was, if Soma had betrayed him, then the amulet was 100% trackable. If Soma hadn't, there was still a decent chance that the fake Lyra had either gotten to and marked the amulet, or given it to him in the first place. Rhys glanced up, then drew the hunger. Beside him, without needing a word, Sable silently unsheathed her bony limbs. She started to draw away, making room for her to fight, but Rhys shook his head and gestured her closer. He was forming a plan right now, and if it was going to work, he needed Sable within arm's reach. Virgil laughed. I've known everything since the start. It was simply time to nip this little rebellion in the bud. Soma, is he in prison, awaiting torture? I bet he's just dying of anticipation. Quote. I mean, oh no. Soma, my ally. He hates torture. I must save him as soon as possible. Even Sable gave him a look at that one. Rhys coughed. Well, at least I can rule out Soma betraying me, probably. Which means he just decided it was time for the fake Lyra to reveal herself. Then again, we can check that, too. What about Lyra? A dry laugh. Sable, you should give up on seeing your friends ever again. Guess he isn't fully tipping his hand. He thinks I don't know about fake Lyra. Rhys thought for a moment, then shrugged. It was like how he wasn't giving up that he had real Sable. On the other hand, Virgil wasn't bragging about having Lyra ready to torture, either, so there was every possibility that Lyra was free, safe, and off living her best life with a new face and new appearance, having totally forgotten about Rhys and all his troubles. After all, if he'd had her, there was no reason to remain cagey about fake Lyra. He might as well brag that he had Lyra for torture, whether it was real Lyra or not. But if it was just fake Lyra, bragging about her threatened tipping his hand and required him to put her in some kind of fake prison, whereas if he simply said nothing, there was a possibility he could use her flexibly in the future, whether she would escape from him, run into Rhys unexpectedly, or anything else. Basically, she went from a powerful, flexible lever and potential future betrayer to a bargaining chip. If Rhys didn't know she was evil, then better to keep her flexible. As for Mouse, Rhys knew she was on Virgil's side, and Virgil knew she was on Virgil's side, and as far as Rhys knew, Virgil thought he couldn't remember she existed at all. Bringing her up was a mistake. There was value in letting Virgil think he'd forgotten her, just as there was value on Virgil's side in letting Rhys forget. Man, we're really playing 5D chess today. Rhys attached a bit of trash to the communication amulet to keep it floating near his face while he rifled in his storage ring with his other hand. Good thing you'll never catch me. I'm coming, and when I do, I'll make you regret you ever, kidnapped my friends. I think that's how it goes. He wasn't that good at memorizing lines. The gist was about the best he could do. To be honest, he'd never even seen the movies about taking people, so it was a memory of a meme rather than a memory of a scene, which was the trashiest kind of memory to have, and yet, all his powers couldn't dredge the perfect line out of the depths of his brain. In the distance, he sensed mana signatures closing in on him. It was go time. He finally found what he was looking for, and pulled a gauntlet out of the trash, his storage ring, along with one of his quick void loops. He tossed the loop at Sable and mouthed, "Retreat for now. I'll be right behind you." She blinked at him and tilted her head. Okay. To be fair, that was a lot of lip reading. He mimed climbing into the hoop, then pointed at himself and the hoop, and mimed him climbing into the hoop. Sable nodded. She stepped into the hoop. Rhys put a hand on her shoulder and pushed her through, then stood in the hoop himself. "You think I can't find you?" Virgil chuckled darkly. He had a good dark chuckle, Rhys had to admit. True villain energy. Though, then again, he was a politician. If he didn't have a good dark chuckle, what even was he? A clown. "Yeah, you'll never find me," Rhys said. To match Virgil's dark chuckle, he used all the enthusiasm of a shonen protagonist. For effect, he even clenched his fist and punched the air. Speaking of, he bent, and placed the gauntlet beside the hoop, its fingers outstretched to grab the hoop. "So you haven't realized?" Virgil asked, still in that dark villain voice. Rhys glanced up. 3 mages closed in on him, all of them tier 3. He sighed, then lowered his trash star to burn at a tier 3 level. Might as well make this a fun fight instead of raffle stomping them. "What? Huh? What do you mean?" There was a pause. "Are you mocking me?" "I'll be honest, I really haven't stopped mocking you," Rhys said. He made a mental note of his spot, even drew an X under the hoop, then spread his stance and held the hunger at the ready. "Do you not fear the Alliance?" "Nah. Then I'll teach you what you ought to." "Yo, Virgil. Listen, I don't fear a whole lot. I'm kinda trash like that. So listen, I'm gonna trash your men, I'm gonna disappear without a trace, and then you're gonna rack that fearful little coward brain of yours figuring out how to deal with me, and you know what?" Virgil paused for a long time. The mages closed in on Rhys, hurtling down. At last, seconds before they struck, he asked, "What?" Rhys grinned. "Got him. You're not going to figure out a damn thing you can do to stop me. Because I'm unfucking stoppable. And your ass is grass." There was another pause. "What? Talk to y'all later, bitch. I got problems to handle." Rhys crushed the communication amulet in his free hand and absorbed the scraps, making sure to crush them down so small no tracking spell or enchantment could possibly survive, then leapt at the incoming mages. "Not my best work, but I did emphasize the important part, vanishing, without a trace." That basically guaranteed that Virgil sent someone to check and see if he'd left any traces, and oh, I'll be leaving a trace, baby. It was 5D chess o'clock, and Rhys was so ready. The lead mage drew a sword. Rhys threw the hunger. The man raised his sword to parry it, and the hunger polluted the sword and crashed right through, tearing a filthy hole through his chest. Rhys lifted his hand, recalling the hunger, as the other 2 mages paused and the third fell off his flying artifact and dropped, screaming, to the ground. Rhys gestured them on. "Come on. What's the holdup? Aren't you supposed to kill me?" One of them turned and fled. Rhys threw the hunger, piercing him through his back. His limbs flew out, and he toppled off his flying sword and hit the ground. The other one charged in, and Rhys recalled the hunger, then hesitated. "I kinda don't want him to die. It's the smoothest way for me to make sure Virgil picks up my no traces that I'm definitely not leaving on purpose." It did make him wonder why Virgil had sent 3 Tier 3s, but then, the answer was pretty obvious, wasn't it? The Alliance didn't have a whole lot of Tier 4s and above. They couldn't just throw them at Rhys in a YOLO attempt to kill him. If they engaged him with Tier 4s deliberately, they'd definitely throw a sure kill trap rather than just yeeting him at them. Rhys closed in on the 3rd mage. They put up a good fight, summoning a bird projection that flew at him. Rhys abruptly remembered the ermine projection he'd stolen, then sighed. I meant to capture that thing, but I guess once I stopped powering it, it just faded away. Still, he had a projection of his own. He called forth the rats, and they swarmed the man. He shrieked and waved his hand, calling his bird back to pluck off the rats, but the rats were more powerful and numerous. They churned up, pulling the bird down into their depths, then massed on the man, biting and infecting him with impurities until he finally passed out. Before they could eat the man down to the bone, Rhys snapped his fingers and dismissed them. He crossed to the other 2 bodies and absorbed them, then pulled the impurities out of the unconscious man. He jolted back to consciousness, but Rhys just grabbed the back of his head and slammed his face into the earth until he went limp again. That concluded, Rhys stepped into his hoop and vanished into the void with Sable. Sable crossed her arms. I wanted to fight. You're too important. You're like a 4th D rook, okay. I need to keep you a secret so when you appear, it's a big impact, you know what I mean. She gave him a look that told him she didn't at all and shook her head. I'm keeping you back now so you can do a really big fight later. Sable's eyes widened, and she nodded slowly, understanding. Rhys looked around, then took Sable's hand and flew them both through the void. Before long, he found what he was looking for, the void gauntlet. Slipping his hand in this side of it, he manipulated the one on the outside to crush the hoop, then walked it over and gripped the back of the final man's head with it. There. Nice and obvious. It looks like I left in a hurry and forgot a tool. Maybe it was a bit too obvious, but there was nothing he could do about that. He released the void gauntlet and flew to his island, where he finally released Sable. Welcome to my secret island. Can I fight here? Sable asked. Not right now. Don't worry. We fight soon, Rhys promised. We'd better. His new face had been trashed, totally revealed and completely useless, so Rhys took a quick dip in the pond on the island and changed it once again. The technique Lyra had taught him was coming in handy, though his foes were calling him out on context clues so often that he had to wonder if it was worth it. This time, he chose a generic extra kind of face, not too handsome, not too ugly, just background enough that it wouldn't stand out without standing out for being so generic. He didn't choose a celebrity or an anime character, but just kept things simple. If he had to change his face again soon, and the way things had been going, he would. He didn't want to waste too much time picking this one. Stepping out of the water, he ran his hair back, then frowned. Come to think of it, the fake Lyra was chilling in water, just like the real one. I wonder if they recruited a water sprite. Either that, or someone spent a long time soaking wet for no reason. He snorted at that. I hope they were miserable. It did leave the question of, where's Lyra, wide open, but she was a competent mage and a powerful water sprite, besides. For all he knew, she'd gone off to take on that Infernon who'd pissed her off back in the Empire. No, come to think of it, that's probably what she did, he thought, nodding to himself. Mouse had gone evil, or at least she was on the enemy time right now, so of course the enemy knew about Lyra, but no one had. Wait, hold on. Lyra's the one who didn't remember Mouse. If she was a fake Lyra, then, Rhys looked at Sable. Do you remember Mouse? Sable squinted. Who? Don't worry about it. So it's true that only I remember Mouse, but on the other hand, why wouldn't fake Lyra remember Mouse, if they're on the same team? Did she think it was possible that I didn't know? But she seemed to earnestly not know what I was talking about. And if she was trying to act accurately as Lyra, then she should remember Mouse. It'd be stranger if she didn't. In fact, if I didn't know Mouse's path, I would have suspected her just for not knowing who Mouse was. Rhys pinched his chin. Was Mouse not on the enemy team? But then, how would the enemy know about Lyra? No, Mouse was with the enemy. But some of the enemy also didn't know about Mouse. She's super ultra secret, he thought, chuckling to himself. Still, it kind of made sense. Since she could be unknown to everyone, why not? She could turn the unknown thing on and off, so if someone was supposed to know about her, they would, and if they weren't, they wouldn't. Rhys frowned. 5D chess time. Is she deliberately letting me remember her? But why? What would that mean? Is there some advantage the enemy team gains by letting me remember Mouse? They were friends, or something, so maybe they were going for the emotional angle. But in that case, surely Virgil would have been mouthing off about her and aggressively taunting him about having Mouse on his side. He hadn't done that, so they weren't using Mouse and Rhys's friendship and maybe more as an element of their plan. If they were using her, they were using her in full stealth mode. Has she just gone totally dark again? He supposed it was possible, but it didn't feel like it. Then he'd have to explain the situation with Lord Norse some other way. And sure, it could be someone else with Mouse's path, but Mouse's path was pretty unique. It had even been considered garbage by her peers and teachers, so it couldn't be something that many people followed. No, she's on their side. They just aren't using her as an emotional pawn, but using her as some kind of, I don't know chess that well. Stealth knight. Knights are stealthy, right? Maybe. He pondered it for a little while, then shrugged, leaving it up to a mystery. He really couldn't figure out why Mouse would let him, and only him, remember her. It didn't make any sense to him. At least he was safe here in the void. No one could get to him. Not Virgil, not the Sword Saint, not anyone. A shadow fell over Rhys, and he looked up to find Sable looming, all her bony limbs bared. Fight me. Now. Could it wait? Aren't we allies? No. I'm done waiting. With that, Sable leapt at him. Never mind. One person can get me. And she's trying. Rhys backed away. Sable. Hey. I don't really do spars. My fighting style is kind of, lethal. Permanently damaging. Please, I'm begging you. I can handle impurities. She lashed out, her limbs closing in on him from all directions. Rhys dashed backward, throwing himself into a hasty back handspring when that wasn't quite enough, as Sable extended her limbs further than he remembered she could. That's true, but. She closed the distance the second he opened it, darting forward on her spider limbs and instantly throwing a kick. Fight me. Done wanna a. Taking the kick on his ass, Rhys turned and nobly fled like a true gentleman. He'd come a long way since his early days of getting beaten up by Straw, Bast, basically anyone and everyone he encountered. He didn't want to get beaten up anymore. He'd developed an entire sure-kill one-hit technique of fighting that minimized the physical part of fighting that sucked, aka getting hit, and maximized him killing his enemies as fast as possible. Back in the day, he'd been so trash that getting beaten up in a fight was a done deal, guaranteed kind of thing. He'd needed getting beaten up practice. Now, he didn't get beaten up anymore, nor did he want to get beaten up anymore. People changed. They matured. They overcame their early days when they might have been accused, from an outside perspective and someone who couldn't see the internal part of how much getting constantly beaten up had sucked, of masochism. They encountered people like Soma and realized just how viscerally troublesome getting publicly accused of masochism around certain people might be. They went through a lot of things and reflected on them, and realized the truth of the world. Getting beaten up sucked, and Rhys were sick of it. And so Rhys raced around his inner world equivalent secret island, getting chased by a beautiful woman in a leotard and a cape who mostly scuttled after him on her spider legs rather than using her people legs. On his third lap, he turned and caught sight of Darren, relaxing in the middle of the island with his hands behind his back, feet up on an imaginary ottoman and back reclined into an imaginary lounge chair. He gave Rhys the smuggest grin Rhys had ever seen or felt, and closed his eyes in blissful relaxation. Rhys scowled. How dare you? Get over here, and you get chased instead of me. But for the first time, Darren's immaterial form worked in his favor. There was nothing Rhys could do to redirect Sable toward Darren. He floated there, smugly, visible only to Rhys, and Rhys had to suffer. Curse you, useless ring grandpa. Rhys thought, scowling. Then again, he had to admit, classic ring grandpa move. Can't we talk this out, Sable? We're just here to wait for the big fight. If we get injured now, we won't be able to fight our real opponents later. If we fight now, we'll learn. We'll grow more powerful. Oh shit, she's right. But we shouldn't. Why not? Rhys racked his brains. Because we love and respect one another as equals. That's precisely why we should fight. Damn it. Why is she so good at this? I met your dad. Don't you want to hear about it? Your father. Sid. Her gaze brightened, but she didn't stop charging him even for a split second. Then you fought him. I want to fight someone who survived my father. No, we didn't fight. We talked. We just had a nice conversation, and no one committed any violence. Surprise flashed across Sable's face, only for disbelief to wipe it away a moment later. Impossible. Stop running and fight me. It is possible. And it's possible for us, too. If Sid can do it, you can too. Sable considered it for a second, then shook her head. No. Oh, come on. Rhys glanced back. The onrush of several long, white limbs lifting Sable's body like a spider's legs sent shivers down his spine, but he repressed it. Why can't we choose calm and peace? Because they suck and they're boring. Rhys flinched. Ooh, my own comments about slice of life coming back to slap me in the face. I never liked slice of life much back in my homeworld, unless there was a strong vibe. I'd much rather read action, horror, anything else, literally anything but boring snooze fest slice of life. But when it comes to my life, I don't want constant non-stop action. Please, Sable, gods, forgive me for my past transgressions. Okay, what if we just do a quick duel? 1 round. First point ends it. Sable said nothing. She lunged, leaping forward faster than Rhys knew she was able to. Her limbs closed in on him on all sides. Shit. Rhys's body blurred, and he vanished. Sable's limbs closed around nothing. She looked around, searching for Rhys. A hand closed on the back of her head and slammed her into the dirt. Sable struggled, but Rhys exerted his Tier 4 strength and kept her pinned. Please, Sable, I'm not in the mood. Can we just hang out? Sable struggled, but it was like trying to budge against a steel block. Rhys's hand didn't budge. She struggled harder, fighting with all her might. The island broke apart beneath her, the dirt cracking open underneath her, but Rhys just kept pushing down, keeping her pinned. It was a bit reminiscent of fighting as a kid, when he'd just pushed down his little sibling's head until they gave up and stopped fighting. Sable stilled at last. She looked up at Rhys. You're strong. Yeah, I know. So that's why you didn't want to fight. Understanding flickered in her eyes at last, and she nodded. Let me up. I won't attack anymore. Oh, okay, Rhys said. He released her and stepped back, feeling as if Sable had gotten something out of that interaction that he hadn't, nor had he meant, whatever it was she'd understood. He'd been thinking about small children, and she'd been thinking about the jungle, or something. He wasn't quite sure, but that seemed to be what had happened. But you're not strong enough to beat my father. No. Because we didn't fight. I swear we didn't. We just talked. She shook her head. That's not possible. It really is. He was even acting as someone's, well, kind of. As someone's. Sable prompted. As someone's servant, Rhys finished reluctantly. Sable gave him a look of utmost disbelief. You didn't meet my father. No, he wasn't. Well, the person told me that Sid was his servant, but he was lying. I brought Sid back to him, but, it didn't end well for him. It wouldn't. No, yeah. It was a poorly thought out ploy to kill me on his part, to be very honest. It should have worked. Rhys shrugged. Maybe. I seem to have affinity with remnant weapons, though. Sable raised her brows. She walked off, wandering into the island. Rhys sighed in relief and ran his hair back. Well, at least no one on my secret void island is trying to kill me anymore, but I'm still in a bad place. I don't know where real Lyra is, Mouse is still a mystery, and my plan to kill Virgil has all gone sideways. The cards were down. The chips were against him. He had his back against the wall. He was truly in a trashy place, in other words, in his element. Rhys grinned. His eyes shone. So, what's my move? Rhys stepped out into the real world. Sable remained behind on his island, though he made a mental note that he needed to find a sparring partner for her real quick, or else things would get dicey for him. He'd gotten away this time with the ol' sibling head maneuver, but it wasn't an inescapable move, as he knew well. If Sable was more persistent in the future, it'd cause trouble for him. Better if he found someone for her to use that excess energy on. You know, she has lots of extra energy, and she's good at handling impurities. And Soma needs someone to make a real human connection with. Rhys slapped his own cheek. What was he even thinking? Matchmaking Soma in the middle of everything. First off, Soma was in prison, presumably facing torture, which he definitely wouldn't enjoy or somehow turn into some kind of BDSM kink. He should be worried about Soma, or at least the impending sexual harassment of Soma's torturer, not matchmaking him. Second off, deep human connection was not really what Sable did. She was a very physical person in a lot of ways. He was sure she would happily hammer Soma, or maybe even engage him on a less aggressive, less attack-based, less spar-based manner, but what Soma needed, even if he didn't realize it, was conversation, emotional bonding, and coming to a mutual understanding based on more than just physicality, which, as he'd mentioned earlier, was not Sable's forte. On Sable's side, he wasn't sure how, aware she was of, how to put it, physical relationship options aside from battle. She wasn't a too pure for this world cinnamon roll, but she was largely disinterested in any part of life that didn't involve violence. She probably knew what sex was, but did she know what sex meant? And more importantly, did she care? If she was active in that kind of way, then he would be absolutely shocked if she engaged in any level above pure physical. Which was fine. It was a choice that Sable was clearly very pleased with in every other aspect of her life. But it wasn't a great way to become the counterpoint to the oversexed, physical-obsessed Soma. She'd fit right in among Soma's harem, strangely enough, but she wasn't going to teach him that there was more to life and relationships than shallow physicality. Rhys shook his head. Aside from Soma having impurities and Sable being able to handle impurities, the two were about as bad for one another as any match he could imagine. I need to find her a sparring partner, not a sparring partner. He'd been sidetracked by intrusive thoughts again, but there really wasn't much to comment about the place he'd stepped out into. It was forested and secluded, just a random place near the edge of the empire where he'd left a trash bin, once upon a time. He set off at a run, weaving a fresh trash bin as he ran. He didn't have enough materials in his trash star anymore to create buckets at will, what with crushing and compressing everything down, but what he did have was heat and finely ground materials. He drew out a thin strand of materials from the star, letting the heat melt them, then set them as he wove them into a basket. It was like a trashy version of 3D printing, where he used leftover metals, resins, and anything else that would melt instead of thermoplastic, where the extruder was his trash star, and the head was his hands. He ran at speed, hurtling over the landscape at his full Tier 4 speed. Whenever he finished a basket, he imbued the void into it, then dropped it where he stood. He zigzagged a little so he didn't drop them all in a straight line, and threw some, hurtling them into the woods at random. It occurred to him that he was basically seeding the world with trash cans, like a weird version of Johnny Appleseed. Years from now, someone would stumble across his wild trash bins and have absolutely no idea what was going on with the random wilderness receptacles. Maybe they'd even take it home and start using it, which would be ideal for Rhys. Until then, though, he'd have to make do with tossing random teleportation points around for later. What did Walt Disney say? 1 every 20 feet, or else people just throw their trash away. He certainly wasn't going to achieve that, but then, these were mages, not ordinary people. Maybe they had a longer tolerance for carrying trash. And maybe if I want people to use these, I shouldn't be tossing them into the wilderness, but placing them intentionally in places people go. Like, I dunno, in cities, or beside major roads. He had to admit, these trash cans were 99.999% teleportation points, and 0.0001% trash can. Whatever worked. A concept came to him as he ran on. Most mages flew around, unlike the earthbound Rhys. Even he didn't understand his obsession, but here he was using magic artifacts until they were able to fly on their own power. He put all his trash cans on the ground. That was great for low-level mages and mortals, but it wasn't great for getting mages to hand over their useless artifacts and other trash. Highly mana-empowered trash counted as more trash than base mortal trash, as he'd discovered or maybe rediscovered. His memory was a bit of a garbage heap in the Black Palace. But, even though they flew, or maybe because they flew, there would still be common routes and popular roads, from one place into another even in the sky. If he developed flying trash cans and seeded those along the popular flight paths, he'd actually obtain powerful mage trash. Rhys nodded to himself. I'm definitely doing that. Step 1, take down the Alliance. Step 2, seed the sky with floating trash cans. He continued making trash cans as he ran, but this time, he started experimenting with making them fly. He had to start from zero, because he'd never made anything fly before. Hell, he'd barely even made himself fly. He didn't have any flying artifacts, either. Wait, no. Yes I do. Lots of mages had flying artifacts, and Rhys killed lots of mages. Ergo, Rhys had lots of flying artifacts. True, most of them were ground to dust and fed to the trash star, but not all of them. Some were in his messy, disorganized storage ring, and some were in his slightly less messy, interesting garbage to not immediately destroy, pile in his trash star. His hands were busy making trash cans, so he focused his attention inward, on the flying artifacts in his trash pile. He could make the trash cans on automatic, which was a nice benefit of building his mental strength. He could separate his attention into several streams, which he'd always been able to do thanks to undiagnosed ADHD, or something like it, but now he could do meaningful things with his different mental streams instead of just have the radio, videos, and the TV on, be low-key monitoring all three of them, and tune in and out of each one depending on which one was on commercial. Meaningful things, in this case, being, build trash cans and, inspect magical flying artifacts. He pulled a flying artifact out of the pile, just flicking his wrist and choosing at random. The flick was totally unnecessary, since, after all, he was drawing an item from his inner space so that he wouldn't have to use his busy hands, but it felt right, and it only messed up the trash can in progress a little bit. A broom floated before him, the absolute classic choice, though there were plenty of swords, shuttles shaped specifically for riding, and all kinds of other random garbage in the pile. He sent his mental energy into the broom, examining the shape of its enchantment from within. The enchantment was both complex and simple. The basic line was thick and straight, piercing through the center of the broom, clearly meant to allow the maximum amount of mana to flow smoothly through, and allow the maximum amount of mana to flow smoothly back out along the entire axis of the broom, so the broom didn't fly wonky or unevenly. At the broom's tail was where the complexity started. The main line was just for pushing mana around, but the complex enchantment at its base was where the actual flying spell lived. Rhys focused on it, memorizing the lines, then called forth his own mana as he finished the current trash can he was working on. He didn't need a big wide line, just a circle at the bottom of the trash can to keep it floating. That part was easy. Then the enchantment, his brows furrowed. He narrowed his mana down to the narrowest stream he could and copied the lines, which still felt like a child's crayon compared to the fine work imbued in the original broom. Finishing the work, he released the trash can. It dropped to the ground. Rhys frowned, recalling it with a wave of his hand. A moment later, he realized his mistake. He hadn't given the trash can any mana to pull from. The broom was powered by its rider, but this trash can didn't have a rider. It needed a mana source. A mana battery. Right, duh. Rhys rifled around in his valuable trash pile until he found one. Coincidentally, it was attached to another flying machine, this one clearly designed for beginners. Rhys ripped out the mana battery and attached it to the trash can. The mana circuit lit up, and so did Rhys's eyes, though in excitement, not because of a mana battery. He released the can. It hit the ground with a thump. Rhys squinted. What am I doing wrong? He had the circuitry. He had the battery. In his world, that was all you needed to make thing go. What was different, in this world? He rolled his eyes at himself. Intent. He'd just copied the enchantment, but hadn't put any intent into it. For someone who'd literally just read the intent from someone else's enchanted marks, he really would have thought of that first, before anything else, but here he was, looking like an idiot. Alright, let's give this another shot. This time, Rhys activated his trashed intense reading skill, then had an even better idea. He'd slurped up all the intents before. What if he just grabbed them and slapped them onto his new, shoddier work? Sure, the ultimate goal would be to comprehend them and reapply them, but Rhys was trash at things that weren't trash. Flying enchantments weren't trash. They were pretty cool, honestly. He could probably comprehend the technique if he applied himself for long enough, but he wanted flying trash cans now, not later. He grabbed the intents and yanked them out, then pushed them into his child's crayon enchantment. The intents trembled for a second, a little lost, then figured themselves out and jerked into place. The shoddily constructed flying trash can jerked in Rhys's hand, then jolted upward, hovering awkwardly on the air in front of Rhys. He picked it up and set it down, and it hovered where he put it. That tracks. It did put an enchantment meant for manual flight on an autonomous trash can. It's good that it even bothers to auto-hover. He went to toss it into the air, then paused. Mouse surely knew about his trash cans, and he didn't want to give himself away. Yes, he'd been Johnny Appleseeding his way across the terrain, leaving a string of cans behind him, but most mages didn't fly, and the ones that could walk wouldn't have any idea who the trash cans were attached to. Plus, someone could see a flying trash can from miles away. A dropped can would vanish into the brush from a dozen meters out. Besides, it's not like he won't expect me to be in the capital. I'm not giving too much away, even if he does notice and figure it out. He ran on, hurtling through the woods. Rhys entered the capital quietly, mingling with the long line of mages heading through the gates. The capital had impressive walls and a powerful barrier bristling with detection mechanisms. He wasn't sure he could sneak through without being noticed, and he really didn't want to be the equivalent of that shitty criminal who got stuck in the window and had to be pulled out by cops. Sneaking too hard, too early was a good way to get caught, and Rhys didn't want to be caught. There were guards at the door, checking everyone on their way in. Rhys quietly killed his trash star down to the minimum, about tier 2, and prepared a story in the back of his head. When he stepped up, he smiled serenely at the guard. "Good morning. Good morning. Do you have an entry permit?" "No, I'm afraid not. Do we need entry permits?" "I don't recall needing one the last time I was here." The guard let out a long-suffering sigh. "It's a recent requirement, sir." Rhys wrinkled his nose. "Oof. I imagine you've been running into people like me all day, then." "You have no idea. No one has a permit, and everyone wants in." Rhys shook his head sympathetically. "I'm so sorry. I hate to be a part of the problem." No, it's fine. There's still a grace period, so you can go in for today. Honestly, you can only get the permits in here, so I have no idea how it's going to work long term. It's a bunch of bullshit coming down from the top again. Just make sure you get an entry permit for the next time you arrive." "Of course." Rhys nodded and went to walk in, only for the guard to extend his arm. Rhys paused and looked back, raising his brows, not sure whether to channel his inner Karen or his inner mass murderer. "Sorry, but, are you bringing any goods in today? Or just sightseeing?" "Just sightseeing. But you've been to the capital before." Rhys blinked at him. "Yes. I love visiting cities every decade or so to see how everything is changed." "Would you begrudge an old man his hobbies?" The guard looked him up and down. "You look remarkable for a tier 2 with decades under your belt." Rhys smiled. "That's very kind of you. I have several skills and techniques related to my appearance, it's my vanity. Probably why I haven't advanced." "That's unfortunate," the guard said, suddenly sympathetic. "You know, I've also been struggling to advance. I understand the struggle. What you're good at and what you like don't always line up, you know." "Isn't that the truth?" said Rhys, the man who loved trash and was also good at exclusively trash. At last, the guard stepped aside, barking for the next mage to step forward. Rhys passed by smoothly, a neutral smile on his face. "Damn, that guy was chatty. A couple times, I thought he was going to break my cover, but he just wanted to chat at the end of the day. I ended up giving him more of my cover story than I meant to, but whatever works, at the end of the day." If he had to guess, the entry permits were his fault. He could be wrong, but he was the cause of Virgil's most recent paranoid freakout, so he felt like he had a strong line on being the reason, or at least part of the reason. As he walked into the capital, he took care to swap between scanning with his mage senses and scanning with his cursed sense. It spiked his own anxiety and paranoia, which was annoying, but it was better than getting backstabbed by Mouse. Not that he thought she was necessarily going to, but better safe than sorry, and all that. Even if he believed in Mouse, he wasn't going to pretend like she wasn't a potential threat and/or problem. She was on Virgil's team right now, and he knew she was susceptible to listening OT orders, so even if Mouse wouldn't do something like stab him in the back, it was very possible that Virgil would order her to do it, and she'd cave. Thus, he didn't let up on his senses, and kept himself on high alert, even if it did mean that he plunged into anxiety hell, or whatever happened whenever he had to deal with his dumbass coworkers and a deadline at the same time back home. Honestly, it was kind of a nostalgic feeling, even if it was nostalgic in a bad way. No one said, "Aw man, do you remember that one time I had a nervous breakdown? Wasn't that awesome?" But at the same time, it was something he hadn't felt in a while. It reminded him of home. In a bad way. Rhys ran his hands down his face. Fuck, man. I was fucked up back home, and I didn't even realize it. Even over here, in this new world, he still found himself tripping over the scars of his first life every now and again. It wasn't often, but it was enough to say, holy fuck, that life sucked. The person he'd been back then, well, he'd been miserable, and locked up in his room all day. He hadn't had any outlet except for the internet. It wasn't an excuse for anything he'd done or said, but it had been a horrible way to live, and he didn't want to ever go back to it. He'd been a bad person, because he'd been in a bad situation, one that was half his fault, and half capitalism's fault, because God's damn he wouldn't have been tearing his soul apart at a dead-end job full of idiots and half-wits if he hadn't needed to pay rent. And then he brightened up. But now I'm on the winning side of capitalism. I'm rich as fuck, boy. And I don't need to eat, drink, shit, or take shelter. Gods, I'm such a winner. He laughed aloud at himself. It sounded ridiculous even when he thought it, but he really did feel that way. Just being able to escape the rat race was such an immense positive that it was hard to believe. If he'd lived out a long, happy life and died as a Tier 2 mage, who had almost no advantages over humans but the ability to rot away without food, drink, or shelter and not engage in capitalism, he would have died happy. That was how much of a relief escaping from his old life had been. Even his anxiety couldn't bring him down after that realization, so he bounced through the crowds with a spring in his step and enjoyed all the scenery around him. The capital was gorgeous. The buildings were immense, and took full advantage of the opportunities of fantasy architecture. He passed by one building that had, as its first floor, an enormous golden birdcage full of moss, flowers, and birds, atop which an entire shopping mall sprawled. To his other side, living trees formed the walls of the building, shaping themselves around doors and windows as if they'd always dreamed of being a building instead of trees. All around him, buildings perched on improbable stilts, hung off the edge of platforms, or even straight up floated. And in the center of the city, an inverted pyramid floated just over the impossible architecture, ponderously impossible, impressively large. It cast a shadow over the center of the city, but nonetheless, the finest houses proliferated there, in its shadow. Rhys gazed up at it, then snorted. Some things never changed. No matter how bad the environment was, those who sought power would always seek to be close to those with power. That was true whether it was magical, political, or both. After all, that ostentatious building that threw a middle finger at logic, physics, and practicality was surely the seat of the government. What else would it be? No leader would ever allow anyone to sit higher than them, and that inverted triangle was what sat at the top of it all. Abruptly, Rhys widened his eyes. They're everywhere. The Illuminati. There was no eye on the triangle, and it was upside down, but it was a triangle. Everyone knew triangles meant Illuminati, and not anything else, like, for example, being a convenient and sturdy shape that was relatively easy to construct. No, it had to be Illuminati. I just need a hypnotoad and I'm all set for an early 2000s era meme. Chuckling to himself, Rhys walked on. The anxiety was probably making him a little giggly, but at least he was enjoying himself. He was wearing his usual trash robes, but he didn't really stand out. Mages in the capital had a stronger sense of style than they did elsewhere, and he saw all kinds of styles, from ornate robes to very formal, 15th century suits, and everything in between. His robes were a bit plain, but the patchwork was stylized enough that it just looked like an intentional feature of their design. It was, so that tracked, but usually he stood out anyways for having color-blocked robes in a world where color blocking wasn't invented yet. Here, he just looked like he wasn't quite at the top of the avant-garde fashion world. It was a city, so naturally there were street vendors selling potions, accessories, regional delicacies, and other roadside endeavors. With a note of pride, he noticed at least one, if not two potato chip stalls selling his proud reinvention. One of the two was even manned by ex-rebels from his campaign against the Empire. Rhys hadn't been particularly close to any of the people in the stall, but he still tossed them a coin and walked off with a folded paper cone of chips. Without him, they couldn't create the bags, after all. The chips were delicious, though, rather unfortunately for him, not tainted with impurities any more than the usual extent to which potatoes were covered in dirt and therefore impure. He continued his tour of the capital at a lazy pace. There were high-end fashion shops, alchemists' workshops, artisanal device makers, and even expensive magical restaurants whose food, or so the signs claimed, was beneficial to mages and would have positive effects even beyond that of a potion. Rhys believed it. He'd done the same, just in the other direction. It would have been a potent potion that could have poisoned the Empire the way he had. There was something about the slow release of energy and impurities from food that just worked, whether for poisoning people or strengthening them. As he idly ate chips and wandered the capital, it occurred to him that no one would believe him if he told them that he, the Alliance's most wanted, had simply strolled into the capital and had a nice little walkabout. If no one would believe it, then doesn't that put me in the safest place I could be? He chuckled to himself and kept walking, well and truly pleased with himself. Today had been a good day. Nice and productive. Tomorrow, he'd actually begin his battle. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.